Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alexandra Kogut. Alexandra Kogut, 18, was a freshman at the State University of New York at Brockport. She was outgoing and fun-loving. Alexandra had been in a relationship with her boyfriend, Clayton Whitmore, for about 2 years. The couple had met in high school in New Hartford, New York, where they began dating. Despite attending different schools after graduation, they had maintained a close relationship. Although their schools were 3 hours apart, they kept in touch through phone calls, social media messages, and frequent visits. Clayton was a great guy who played hockey at Utica College in New York while studying to become an accountant. He was a skilled athlete and a promising hockey player, and many believed he had a bright future ahead of him. Alexandra's family and friends liked Clayton and considered him a promising young man. They hoped that their relationship would develop into something serious over time. In high school, Alexandra had participated in track and field as well as swimming. She also represented her university in competitions. On Friday, September 28, 2012, Alexandra was excited because her boyfriend, Clayton, was coming to visit her for the weekend. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, and Alexandra missed him. Around 3 p.m., she asked her friend and neighbor if she could borrow some clothes. The two often shared outfits, and her friend agreed. Together, they picked out a nice dress. After trying on dresses, Alexandra went to a swim team meeting. She was running late, so Clayton, who had arrived earlier, had to wait for her. Alexandra called him to let him know she would be late. When Alexandra returned from the swim team meeting, she met Clayton, and together they went to visit a friend of his for dinner. They didn't return to campus until after midnight. Alexandra had assured her mother that she would call or text when she got back to avoid causing concern, but she didn't. This was unusual because Alexandra was always reliable in such matters. Her mother became increasingly worried, sensing that something was wrong. At 2:42 a.m., her mother decided to contact university security and requested a welfare check on her daughter. University security responded quickly and went to Alexandra's dormitory to check. They knocked on the door, which was unlocked, and entered the room. Inside, they found a horrific scene. The dormitory room, which Alexandra and her roommate shared, was covered in blood. In the middle of the room lay a young girl, face down and dead. The victim had multiple injuries, and it was immediately clear that this was not an accident but a brutal murder. Alarmed, they quickly called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they found a photo of Alexandra and Clayton together, and they recognized Clayton. That night, the police saw him walking down the street with a girl. He was holding an open can of beer, which attracted the attention of a patrol officer. Clayton was ticketed for the open can of beer but remained calm and cooperative. He then threw the can away and crossed the street, disappearing from sight. As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that Alexandra and her boyfriend, Clayton, had gone to her dorm room together. It was later discovered that Clayton had planned to flee to Canada after the incident. Police began interviewing dorm residents to identify witnesses and gather more evidence. However, most students were not in their rooms at the time. Many had gone home for the weekend, while others were partying or visiting friends. Some residents reported hearing screams and sounds of fighting in the distance but paid little attention, as such noises were common. At around 3 a.m., Clayton's father called 911 and informed the police that his son had confessed to the murder. He explained that Clayton had called him, sounding very agitated, and admitted to doing something terrible. However, Clayton's father had no further details to provide and suggested that the police contact Clayton directly. He also mentioned that he did not know his son's exact location. Police attempted to contact Clayton and trace his phone but were unsuccessful. When they called Clayton's father back, he mentioned that Clayton's girlfriend was in Brockport and that Clayton might still be with her. At this point, police determined that Clayton was still near the crime scene. A patrol car was dispatched to the scene approximately 45 minutes after Clayton's father's initial call. Shortly thereafter, Clayton himself called 911, stating that he wanted to surrender because he had committed a terrible crime. Police located and arrested Clayton Whitmore at approximately 4 a.m. at a rest stop on the New York State Thruway. At this point, police confirmed that the murdered woman was Alexandra Kogut. They discovered that she had used her key card to enter the dormitory building just before she was killed. At the police station, Clayton was questioned to determine what had happened that night and why Alexandra had been killed. Clayton insisted that his relationship with Alexandra had been normal and respectful. However, he said things had taken a turn for the worse on the evening of the incident. According to him, Alexandra had yelled at him in public for no apparent reason. Although she was sweet and cheerful with others, he felt that she had disrespected him. Clayton believed that her behavior was unreasonable and unacceptable. Clayton admitted that he had been holding back resentment toward Alexandra but finally lost control after being fined while walking down the street. He returned to her room feeling tense. Alexandra told him that she wanted to have a serious talk. She revealed that she suspected Clayton of cheating because, some time ago, a photo of an unfamiliar girl had appeared on his phone. When he failed to provide a clear explanation, Alexandra began provoking him by shouting and acting disrespectfully and aggressively. She then began to push him. Finally, Clayton could not take the pressure anymore. In a fit of rage, he attacked Alexandra, throwing her against the wall. He then began hitting her and was unable to stop. He only realized the severity of his actions when he saw Alexandra lying unconscious on the floor, showing no signs of life. Clayton admitted that, during the attack, he had not thought to stop or try to help her. He told police he had been angry and claimed that it was not intentional and that he had no plan or desire to harm her. Clayton initially fled the scene of the crime. After realizing the severity of his actions, he called his father and confessed. His father urged him to surrender to the police, which he eventually did. Although he expressed remorse, Clayton avoided confirming whether a weapon had been used in the murder. He later revealed more details, stating that after punching Alexandra several times, he noticed her breathing had become labored, and she was making wheezing sounds. In response, he took a curling iron and struck her on the head until the noises stopped. Clayton claimed he was fully conscious at the time. Alexandra's autopsy supported his claim, confirming blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death. Police found blood on the curling iron, along with other evidence indicating that Alexandra's head injury had also been caused by hitting the wall. Clayton was charged with murder and held without bail pending trial. However, he later recanted his confession and denied his guilt. The investigation continued for a long time as police interviewed people who had been involved with Clayton. It was highly likely that he had intentionally harmed Alexandra. Their suspicions were reinforced by the testimony of Clayton's ex-girlfriend, who revealed that she had been subjected to constant violence from him. She decided to end their relationship after he tried to strangle her during an argument. At one point, it seemed as though he might actually kill her, but he ultimately held back. Out of fear, she fled to another city to escape him. Several of Clayton's friends also confirmed his aggressive and erratic behavior. They described him as short-tempered and hostile. One friend recalled an incident at a bar where Clayton wielded a knife and threatened a group of strangers. By the spring of 2014, the case went to trial. The prosecution presented a recording of Clayton confessing to the murder, along with various pieces of physical evidence collected by forensic experts. His fingerprints and DNA were found at the crime scene. The defense acknowledged that Clayton had committed the murder but argued that it was unintentional. Their goal was to secure a reduced sentence. Clayton's attorneys made it clear to the jury and the court that Clayton had been extremely distressed that evening due to being insulted by Alexandra, being fined by the police, and being pressured by Alexandra during a conversation about his betrayal. They argued that these factors had caused Clayton to become emotionally unstable. They claimed that he had lost control and directed his anger at Alexandra. The lawyers stressed that Alexandra had provoked Clayton and that the murder should be considered to have occurred in a state of emotional distress. Clayton blamed his aggressive and emotionally unstable behavior on his father. He explained that his aggression stemmed from years of abuse at the hands of his father, who had treated him and other family members cruelly. According to Clayton, he had suffered years of pressure, moral degradation, and physical abuse from his father. Clayton recounted incidents such as his father beating his brother with a baseball bat, breaking his sister's nose, and kicking his mother. Once, when his father found the children's fingerprints in the car, he tried to force the children to eat the TV remote. Clayton expressed remorse for not being able to resist his father's abusive influence, admitting that he had become a mirror image of his father, whom he despised. Clayton admitted that this led him to humiliate and abuse his girlfriend, act aggressively, and harbor hatred for the world. He apologized to Alexandra's family, expressing genuine remorse for his inability to change his behavior. The prosecution pointed out that there were almost no photographs of Clayton smiling. He appeared cold and distant in all of them. Was this behavior part of his nature? While prosecutors did not dispute Clayton's allegations of abuse by his father, they argued that this did not excuse his actions. The trial lasted about 3 weeks, during which dozens of witnesses testified. The jury deliberated and eventually returned a verdict, finding Clayton Whitmore guilty. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Clayton showed no emotion throughout the trial, but after the verdict was announced, he broke down and cried. Notably, Alexandra's family was shocked to learn about the alleged abuse she endured during the relationship. They were unaware of any problems between Alexandra and Clayton, as she had never mentioned any cruelty or aggression toward her. However, when police examined Alexandra's phone, they uncovered at least 30 threatening voice messages from Clayton. It is believed there may have been more, but these recordings were not thoroughly analyzed. Police dismissed this evidence, citing the need for voice analysis, which could have further delayed the case. As a result, none of these threats were presented in court. This evidence could have led to the case being reclassified as first-degree murder, which carries a harsher sentence than manslaughter. About an hour before Alexandra was fatally beaten, she posted a final message on her social media page. It is unclear what was on her mind at the time, but she may have sensed impending danger. Following Alexandra's tragic death, her relatives established a charity to support women who have endured domestic violence, encouraging them to report their experiences and raising public awareness of the issue. Supporters of the charity identify themselves by painting their pinkies purple, a tribute to Alexandra's favorite color. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Teed family. What was supposed to be a peaceful holiday turned into a terrible nightmare, leaving the survivors with scars that would never heal. When the Teed family set out for their remote house to celebrate Christmas, they had no idea that their trip would lead them into a tragedy few could have imagined. So, what happened to them? Join me as we explore the story of today's case. Rolf Tita was born in Germany. When he was just 11 years old, he and his mother moved to the United States. Shortly after their arrival, his mother remarried and chose to begin a new life following her first unsuccessful marriage. Rolf was a quiet boy who excelled in his studies. When he started college, he met Kay. They were both studying similar subjects and shared similar life views. Like Rolf, Kay was calm and sociable, and she dreamed of building her American dream and starting a family with someone who shared her values. Rolf quickly seemed like the perfect match for her. They had so much in common that after their first meeting, they became inseparable. At this point, Rolf was just over 20 years old. Both of them had serious intentions for their future, and their parents supported their relationship, which was progressing well. The two of them decided to move to a new home and began a journey across the country. They first lived in Nevada, then in Utah, but this was just the start. As they traveled to various locations, Rolf and Kay enjoyed their time together and eventually chose to get married. Shortly after, they started planning their next move, looking for a larger house and considering starting a family. In 1963, the young couple moved to the small town of Humble, Texas, which had a population of around 10,000. They were dedicated members of the Christian church, loved children, and aspired to have a large family. They quickly became part of the local community and earned the respect of those around them. Unfortunately, the Tied couple faced challenges that prevented them from having children for many years. However, they found a solution. They decided to adopt. After adopting their second child, Kay was surprised to find out that she was pregnant again, which they viewed as a miracle. The pregnancy was so subtle that she didn't even realize it. She later gave birth to a healthy daughter named Trish. The family enjoyed a fulfilling life and happy, having everything they needed to cherish their time together. Rolf excelled in trading and had dreamed of starting his own business since his student days. By the time their children were born, he was earning a good income, which allowed Kay to stay home and focus on raising the children. Thanks to his hard work and entrepreneurial spirit, Rolf opened a company in 1969 that quickly became part of the Houston retail market. With their financial stability, they eventually purchased a house in Utah, a small town with just over 500 residents in the 1990s. The mountainous area felt peaceful and secluded. They found a beautiful house perched high in the mountains, and it was considered very safe, much quieter than the nearby towns. The locals were well acquainted with one another, and their families seamlessly integrated into this community. The house was located about 4 kilometers from the nearest road. A beautiful river flowed nearby, with trees lining both banks. Despite the transportation challenges, especially in winter, their family made it a tradition to spend the entire Christmas holiday there every year. To reach the house, they would leave their car in a parking lot near the road and use snowmobiles to travel up into the mountains, as this was the quickest way to get there. By December 1990, their family's routine had not changed. They planned to return to their forest house for the Christmas holidays. On December 20th, Kay and her son, Sean, flew from Texas to Oakley, where her sister Claudia Tidwell Nelson picked her up. Claudia drove her so they could wait together for the others. Rolf, Line, and Trish were scheduled to arrive the following evening, December 21st. Typically, Rolf wrapped up his work before the vacation, while Kay visited her sister Claudia to help organize the gathering and prepare food and supplies for their trip to the mountains. At the usual spot where they parked their cars to switched modes of transportation, Kay and Claudia noticed a young man who looked suspicious. Even though it was freezing outside, he was wearing light shoes and a thin shirt, which was quite odd. They offered to assist him, but he didn't respond and instead walked faster, quickly disappearing from view. They reached their house just before sunset and had dinner. Claudia chose to stay overnight. In the morning, thinking she saw a figure outside the window. Claudia and Kay searched for any signs outside but found nothing. It appeared that someone had used their paths without being seen. Ultimately, they chose to focus on getting ready for the busy weekend ahead. On December 21st, by the time Rolf and his daughters arrived, everything is almost ready. Kay shared details about recent events, including a suspicious person she had encountered while with Claudia. She felt particularly uneasy about this stranger, who seemed to belong to the area. Kay suggested that Rolf take hunting rifles and transport them to the house on a snowmobile, just in case something unexpected occurred. However, Rolf declined, believing there was no need for such precautions. He felt confident that everything would be fine and thought that carrying weapons in everyday life was too dangerous. In fact, Rolf lacked experience with rifles and pistols. He mentioned that this area has been the safest in the last 100 years. In the suburbs, there has only been one incident, which was not even related to gunfire. Despite some aggressive driving and poor behavior on the roads, there have only been a few robberies over several decades. Unfortunately, he was unaware of how dangerous some people in the area had become. Kay expressed that something was off, so she decided to take precautions. She grabbed a couple of rifles and loaded them onto the snowmobile, saying it would make her feel safer. Her husband did not object. An adult among the teenagers helped move their belongings into the house. Claudia left in the morning to buy supplies she had forgotten for the upcoming holiday. Kay and Rolf decorated their home and prepared for a celebration. Because they lacked some necessities, they decided to go to the city to buy more. At this time, Sean, feeling overwhelmed by the busyness, asked to stay the night with his Aunt Claudia, which likely helped him relax. After dropping Sean off, their family visited Kay's mother, Beth. At that time, she was 72 years old, had poor eyesight, and was partially paralyzed due to a car accident earlier that year. Kay and her family visited her regularly and often took her to their home. This visit was no different. They spent the evening talking and enjoying each other's company, preparing to leave for the mountains the next day. On December 2nd, around noon, Teed family went to town. It was a particularly frosty day. The group then split up. Rolf and Trish planned to return to the cabin, while Kay, Linny, and Beth walked towards their house in the mountains. The two groups ended up about 2 hours apart. Kay and Linny arrived at their destination first and intended to set up a chair. While stopping near the garage, Linny noticed a dark figure in the main bedroom. Mistaking it for her cousin David, she didn't think much of it. Linny ran in, immediately turned on the hot water to warm her hands, and with her peripheral vision, she saw a dark figure hiding behind the refrigerator. Thinking it was just David, trying to scare her, she laughed to herself. However, when the figure stepped into the light, she realized it wasn't David at all. It was a young man with curly hair, he pointing a gun at her. She attempted to alert the others, but they had already noticed the armed intruder. Kay felt powerless against the intruder, regretted not grabbing a gun from the garage. He commanded Linny to help her grandmother and mother go upstairs. Beth, with her daughter and granddaughter, struggled to ascend to the second floor, worried that the intruder might start attacking if they didn't hurry. Another man wearing glasses appeared, also holding a weapon. Kay panicked, pleaded for their lives, promising to give anything. Without hesitation, the stranger man with curly hair attacked her by force. She fell to the ground, screaming in pain. The assailant attacked her several more times. Then, he aimed the gun at Beth and also attacked by force her in the face. Surprisingly, Beth did not die. She collapsed but quickly tried to get back up. The thug attacked her again multiple times. He confused about needing to use so many bullets, while another man seemed to enjoy the chaos. Linny prepared for her own fate, but unexpectedly, she was taken to the bedroom. The intruders gagged her with a dirty sock and tied her hands and feet. One of the two strangers brought a dog and handed over for Linny, claiming it would calm her down. They left her and returned to their shot victims. Gang leader continues to attack Kay and Beth, then took all the jewelry from the dead and emptied their pockets of valuables. They dragged the bodies outside, leaving them in front of Linny. She had just witnessed her grandmother and mother die. Simultaneously, she realized her father and younger sister would be home soon. She was in danger herself and wanted to warn them, but there was no time. At 2:45 p.m., Rolf and Trish rode snowmobiles back to the house. Sean still lives with Claudia. Meanwhile, the killers were waiting for new victims, and one of them held a weapon to Linny's head, threatening to kill her if she made a sound. When Rolf entered the house, he saw Linny being used as a human shield by an armed man who had a weapon pressed to her head. The strangers confronted Rolf and the rest in the living room. The newcomers immediately noticed the bodies of their loved ones and wanted to help, but the attackers prevented them from doing so. In a desperate attempt, Rolf began emptying his pockets, giving the criminals cash and his expensive watch. However, the leader ordered his partner to attack Rolf. The second attacker hesitated, clearly reluctant to get involved. Finally, the leader aimed his pistol and pulled the trigger, but it only clicked. He tried again, and still nothing happened. The third time, he succeeded in attacking Rolf. Trish panicked to see her father collapse to the floor, bleeding. The attackers then searched Trish's bag, but did nothing to her. Instead of escalating the violence, the criminals took Linne and Trish to a bedroom, then locked them inside. They found canisters of gasoline stored in the house for snowmobiles, and began pouring it everywhere. They chatted casually, unwrapped Teed family's gifts, and filmed their antics with a camera they found in the home. They even enjoyed a festive meal prepared by Kay. It seemed they had planned to destroy all evidence of their presence, and they acted nonchalantly. They then returned to Rolf. The leader attacked him in the back of the head again, and subsequently poured gasoline over his body as well. The criminals ordered Trish and Linne to load all the stolen items onto snowmobiles, which were in the garage. They didn't use gasoline to set the garage on fire, as they needed it for their escape. A guy loaded his gun, unbuttoned his jacket, and revealed a knife. Linne noticed this, and he assured her. The criminals then set fire to the house and drove away with the two girls as hostages. While driving the snowmobiles, Trish and Linne considered their options for escaping. They thought about crashing into a tree or causing an accident to get rid of their captors, but they couldn't come up with a plan. During this time, their uncle, Randy Zorn, was driving his car to the Teed family home. He encountered the snowmobile carrying criminals and waved to them, thinking they were familiar faces, possibly his nieces with their boyfriends. However, he was taken aback when they didn't respond to his greeting. Normally, Linne and Trish were respectful and would greet him back. The criminals didn't recognize Randy and simply drove past him. In the parking lot, the strangers transferred the girls into Teed family's car. It was the car Rolf brought the food to. They filled with fear that the experience of their death would be painful. With no other choice, they complied and took their seats in the back of the car. Randy also arrived in the parking lot and waved to them. However, Linne and Trish ignored him because they feared he might become the next target of the killers. The leader of the group noticed Randy and asking Linne if she knew him. She responded that she did not recognize the man. Right after that, the car carrying the hostages left the scene. A moment later, Randy saw a man coming. There was severe frost, but he was without a jacket, without shoes, and even without a hat. It seemed his face was literally torn apart, with drops of blood frozen on him and his face swollen. Randy recognized it was Rolf. Rolf told of the attack on his family. Remarkably, he survived and managed to escape to the parking lot in an effort. He said, the attackers broke into his house in the woods, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. The fire quickly spread, but Rolf pretended to be dead and waited until the chaos died down before taking action. He initially tried to put out the fire, but the fire spread quickly due to the gasoline, causing his jacket to catch fire. He ran into the bathroom, took it off and suffering only minor burns. Fortunately, the garage was not on fire. Driven by the desire to save his daughters, Rolf pursued the kidnappers for 4 kilometers, despite being injured and having impaired vision. He knew the route well enough to reach his destination, but he clearly needed urgent medical attention. Randy put him in the car and drove towards the city, but the medical center was too far away. Randy fears that there may not be enough time to save Rolf's life. He called emergency services, requesting the helicopter and reporting a fire. Meanwhile, the criminals with the hostages were heading towards the canyon. Suddenly, a patrol car passed by them. The police car quickly turned around and began to follow the criminals. The kidnappers ignored the officers' demands to stop and sped up to 150 km/h. With the bad weather and slippery roads, the situation was extremely dangerous. The criminals trying to escape from the police drove past a checkpoint. Several patrol cars joined the chase, and about half an hour later, the criminals got stuck on an embankment. They attempted to climb out to flee. Meanwhile, Linne and Trish seized the opportunity to escape, ran towards the police. When the hostages are safe, A brief shootout ensued. Linne pleaded with the police to handle the attackers who had killed her mother, father, and grandmother. The criminals surrendered immediately. Both were detained without sustaining injuries. Meanwhile, doctors arrived quickly by helicopter to take Rolf to the hospital. They fought to save his life. Despite being attacked in the face and then in the back of the head, Rolf miraculously survived the attack and remained conscious for most of it. He later recovered without experiencing severe consequences from his injuries. Right after that, firefighters fought the fire. The house did not burn down completely, but the property was seriously damaged. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they described it as the most terrible thing they had seen during their work. There was blood all around, with the bodies of the victims left inside the house, was a terrible smell of burnt corpses' flesh. Here they find cameras recording footage of the criminals holding the victims and laughing at them. Based on camera footage, the criminals were arrested, and they are only 25 years old. The killer himself, Von Taylor, had curly hair and was the instigator. Both guys had served time in the Utah State Prison before this crime. In there, Taylor for burglary and arson, while his partner, Edward Deli, had less serious charges. They met each other in a rehabilitation center where they were sent shortly before the end of their prison term. Here, they were prepared to start life from scratch without crime. However, instead, a cunning and bloody plan was born in the minds of the criminals. They escaped from the rehabilitation center instead of integrating into society. On December 14, the thugs hitchhiked to Oakley, where Taylor's father had his own house. There, they spent about a week planning the robbery. In fact, on the day of their arrival at Tidy's house, Kay saw a suspicious guy in the parking lot. He without outerwear, he was just examining the nearby houses in search of another target for robbery. Kay and Beth immediately attracted his attention. On December 22, the criminals broke into the house of the Tidy family when they left for the city. The attackers behaved like the owners, even having fun murders and thefts. They decided to use Trish and Linne as human shields, planning to get to New York, then get rid of the hostages and disappear into the big city. On January 22, Taylor and Deli were officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping. In addition, there are other crimes including theft, arson, and resisting arrest, not to mention escaping from a correctional facility. Both immediately said they had mental problems. However, the examination did not reveal any mental abnormalities in them. They were simply stalling for time. 5 months later, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for all other charges being dropped. Taylor admitted at trial that he was the mastermind behind all of this. He attacked Beth and Kay and felt no remorse. The medical examiner found that Kay had 5 wounds, and Beth also was struck by 3 bullets. Rolf was attacked in the face and then doused with gasoline. When Rolf entered the courtroom, Taylor recognized him. Taylor's face was frozen in surprise, even cursed, and could not believe that Rolf had survived. Ultimately, Taylor was sentenced to death. Despite the confession of the mastermind, Edward Deli pleaded not guilty and decided to appear in court. 2 weeks after Taylor was convicted of murder, Deli's trial began. He had no idea that Rolf had survived, but he from the very beginning showed remorse and insisted that he was not involved in the deaths. He did not kill anyone. According to him, the original plan was to rob, and Deli did not expect that Taylor would start killing. He refused to shoot anyone. Naturally, the prosecution tried to portray Deli as exactly the same cruel person as Taylor. He insisted that he could not pull the trigger. This meant that Rolf, who had witnessed the events, could be the defendant's only chance to escape from a lethal injection. Deli's lawyer tried every way to present a favorable picture for him. Linne also testified in court. She remembered how Deli brought a dog into her room, saying that it should calm her down. Also, He talked to her and Trish to reassure them. It was he who told them to get out of the car when the car stopped. When the court agency discussed finding Deli guilty of second-degree murder, it meant that he received a life sentence, but with the right to parole. The Tiade family filed a lawsuit against the state. They wanted compensation for the deaths of Kay and Beth. According to the survivors, it was the state leadership that was to blame for the escape that the prisoners made from the rehabilitation center, because this led to the bloody massacre. In fact, the claims were quite justified. It became known that on December 22, Von Taylor called his friend named Scott Manley. He told Scott that he and Deli had escaped from a rehabilitation center and also stolen a weapon. Scott admitted that by that time, Taylor and Deli had already robbed several houses in Oakley and now intended to deal with an entire family. Scott was afraid of their intentions and immediately contacted law enforcement officers, telling them about Taylor's confessions. Despite this, the police simply ignored the message. Unfortunately, the court rejected the Tiade family's claims, and no one was punished for their negligence. In 2001, Line received a letter from Deli in which he asked for forgiveness. He wrote that life in prison had changed him. Before, he was just a stupid young man who followed the example of a friend who showed him a cool lifestyle. Line read this letter over and over again, in tears and with hatred. Finally, 10 years later, she decided to throw off the burden and wrote a response to Deli, in which she stated that she forgave him. After that, she felt much better. After the verdict was passed, Deli did not try to appeal the court's decision. Most likely, he will never be released from prison, given the severity of the crime in which he took part. Meanwhile, Taylor has filed 4 appeals. He cited various reasons, including the bias of the jury. All these absurd appeals were rejected. However, these appeals helped him repeatedly push back his execution date. Sometime later, Rolf fully recovered from his injuries and renovated the house. He now enjoys spending time remembering his loved ones. Line and Trish got married and became mothers of many children. Long after that, Rolf died of cancer surrounded by loved ones in 2008. The horrific case of the Tiade family not only left an indelible mark of loss, but also shook the community to recognize the fragility of personal safety. Even in the most peaceful places, the story of Line and Trish Tiade's resilience serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Decades have passed since the case, but the lessons from this tragedy remain relevant, highlighting the importance of justice, compassion, and the ongoing efforts to protect communities from similar atrocities. Thank you for watching. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you all and goodbye. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ted Ammon. Hampton, a popular seaside resort on Long Island, is home to many wealthy New Yorkers and is generally a safe, crime-free area. However, in 2001, the first murder in 20 years occurred there, and the brutality of the crime shattered the long-standing tranquility of East Hampton. The affluent area is home to a mansion owned by a wealthy man, just a short walk from the beach. The shocking news spread rapidly through the local media because of the case involving a wealthy victim and the gruesome nature of the crime. Ted Ammon is a wealthy man who achieved success through his intelligence and hard work. Despite his wealth, he remains humble. Ted grew up in a middle-class family in a small town. After graduating from high school, he went to college where he studied economics and also played on the varsity lacrosse team. From an early age, Ted stood out as a strong, attractive, and energetic person. Although he seemed like an ordinary young man from the countryside, his special abilities set him apart. Ted displayed incredible intelligence and excelled in his studies, which helped him land a prestigious job in the early 80s. The Ted was engaged in buying out companies using borrowed funds, which gradually allowed him to become one of the best in his field. Ted was recognized for his remarkable financial achievements and accumulated wealth. Although easy to talk to, he never flaunted his money or opportunities. Instead, he quietly focused on doing his job better than anyone else. Ted got divorced in 1983 and needed a new apartment. He scheduled a meeting with a staff estate agent named Generosa, but due to his busy schedule, Ted missed the appointment. People who knew Ted were used to his busy life and understood his absence. However, Generosa was upset and called Ted to express her anger. During their conversation, Ted found Generosa quite attractive, so he asked Generosa out on a date, marking the beginning of their relationship. The romance lasted 3 years, and the couple decided to get married in 1986. Initially, their relationship was passionate, but gradually faded over time. That same year, he became involved with a large company, and a deal was made using borrowed funds in the amount of $26 billion, which allowed him to get a good profit, part of which went to him. By 1992, Ted, having gained valuable experience, decided to start his own business with this initial capital. This marked the beginning of his journey towards financial success. As Ted became more successful, he began to accumulate more wealth. He gradually bought luxury real estate, not only in the United States. His first real estate purchase was a high-end estate in the middle of the country, then a house in Manhattan. He also bought a villa in Surrey. Ted was very generous and actively involved in charity work. During his life, he donated about $15 million to his alma mater, and later established his own charity to support children. Generosa was drawn to the luxurious lifestyle that was completely different from what she had known in her early life. She had little knowledge of her father, only that he was an Italian sailor. Her mother had traveled to Italy, where she had an affair with the sailor, leading to Generosa's birth. When she was just 10, her mother passed away from cancer, and her father never appeared in her life, forcing her to live with foster families. This was a challenging time full of fears and despair that Generosa preferred not to recall. Now Generosa experienced a new world filled with the luxury of wealth. Her husband purchased a lavish mansion in the prestigious East Hampton Village. The house, styled like an English manor, featured 6 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms. The mansion featured a variety of luxurious amenities, including a solarium, gym, library, and a heated pool, along with a guest house, all situated on a 90-acre property that included its own pond. Generosa stayed connected to her roots, and like her husband, valued her past. She dedicated herself to helping others, and chose to adopt 2 11-year-old twins after she and her husband were unable to have biological children. Generosa felt a strong desire to improve the lives of children who faced hardships, similar to what she had experienced. The couple named their children Alexa and Gregory. Initially, everything appeared to be going well, but after a few years, Generosa's behavior began to change. Generosa's first sign was cutting off contact with friends without explanation and acting as if she had been wronged, which she used to justify her actions. Her behavior became increasingly unpredictable, and she often became angry over trivial matters. There was one incident where a wealthy client had 600 tulips planted at their home, but Generosa had them pulled out, saying the colors were not what she expected. Unfortunately, much of her anger was directed at her husband, causing significant strain on their once great relationship. In an attempt to repair their marriage, the couple decided to move to England to start over. However, Ted soon had to return home due to work. Generosa started to suspect that her husband, Ted, was having an affair with one of his co-workers. To address her concerns, she took their children and moved back to the United States, settling in a townhouse in New York. In 1999, to verify her suspicions, Generosa hired a private detective who confirmed that Ted had a young mistress. This discovery led to the deterioration of their marriage. Additionally, Generosa was worried that Ted was not only cheating, but also trying to conceal some of their shared assets from her. She believed that Ted's wealth was at least $300 million, although this was never verified. Lawyers spent a considerable amount of time determining Ted's actual net worth, which turned out to be $80 million. Generosa planned to claim half of this amount in their divorce. Generosa and her children then moved into a luxury hotel while she began renovating their home, which was expected to cost about $9 million. To finance the purchase of materials and start work, Generosa borrowed $3 million. All the costs for the hotel, renovations, and loan were covered by Ted. Meanwhile, in central Long Island, a man named Daniel Pelosi was told by a friend that a wealthy woman was spending millions of dollars renovating her home. At the time, Daniel was an unlicensed electrician with a wife and 3 children. His family life was quite difficult. Despite his financial struggles, Daniel remained optimistic and hoped to find a good job in Manhattan to support his family. His circumstances changed when Generosa took notice of him and hired him to do some renovations on her house. They soon began a romantic relationship, which gave Daniel access to both Generosa's bedroom and her wealth. The story of a wealthy woman falling for a man like Daniel attracted public attention, especially since Daniel was so keen to flaunt his relationship. He bragged about it almost everywhere. The news reached Ted, and he decided to divorce. The marriage was over, and lawyers were still working to divide the assets and resolve other contentious issues. Daniel and Generosa come from similar backgrounds, both growing up in poverty. This leads to empathy, and their relationship deepens. Generosa tells Daniel that her husband is a traitor, which makes her angry. In search of comfort, she decides to pursue a relationship with Daniel. However, the renovation of her house becomes increasingly complicated and expensive, costing her a large sum of money, including Ted's savings. Meanwhile, Daniel stays with her and enjoys a lavish life. Daniel's new lifestyle began to take a toll on his family. He developed an alcohol problem, which led to several drunk driving incidents. Daniel lived a wealthy lifestyle, generously tipping $100 at restaurants and spending thousands of dollars on nights out with friends. He described his relationship with Generosa as a blessing. By the summer of 2001, Daniel had completely replaced Ted in Generosa's life. Although the divorce was still pending, Daniel lived with her in an East Hampton mansion and drove Ted's luxury cars. On October 20, 2001, Ted's lawyers finalized a deal on how to divide his assets. After settling debts, repair costs, and taxes, Ted was left with $46 million, half of which would go to Generosa after their divorce. By then, however, the money no longer seemed to be enough for her needs. After the divorce, Ted's friends and family noticed that he seemed happier. That Saturday, Ted drove his luxury car to a restaurant for dinner, then took a walk on the beach while talking on the phone with his new girlfriend. He returned to his East Hampton mansion late that evening. The following Monday, Ted was supposed to attend an important meeting at work, but he did not show up, which was out of character for him. He also failed to arrange for someone to pick up his children from school, raising concerns among those who knew him. His secretary tried to reach him multiple times but received no response. Worried, a business partner hired a helicopter to fly to Ted's mansion. When they arrived, they found Ted's 3 dogs barking loudly in the backyard, but no one answered their calls. The garage door was open, and the house alarm was off. They entered the house and noticed the door was unlocked. The partner and the secretary searched the first floor but could not find Ted. They called out his name, but there was still no answer. As their concern grew, they decided to contact the police. Eventually, Ted was discovered in the bedroom, lying lifeless in a pool of blood. Nearby, there was a large amount of cash, suggesting that robbery was not the motive for the crime. During the autopsy, Forensic experts found that Ted had suffered at least 8 blows to the head from a blunt object, likely a bat, which caused severe injuries and bleeding that were fatal. The evidence pointed to a brutal murder. When Ted got home that Saturday night, it was clear that he had been attacked. The attacker wanted to make sure that Ted had no chance of survival. Ted's first wife then contacted the police. Although their marriage had ended some 20 years ago, they had remained friends and were in regular contact. She contacted the police to share some disturbing information. Just 2 days before his death, Ted had met with her. During that meeting, they discussed the divorce proceedings Ted was facing. However, Ted believed that their problems went beyond the divorce. He felt tension and hostility in their relationship. Ted even joked that Generosa would not calm down until he was dead. The police, hearing the story, were puzzled that Generosa seemed too weak to confront Ted, who was stronger and larger than her boyfriend Daniel. This raised the possibility that they may have been working together. The police focused on Generosa and Daniel as potential prime suspects, but they found no evidence linking the pair to the crime scene. The murder weapon was missing, along with any fingerprints or other traces. Forensic experts worked diligently for weeks, but their efforts yielded no results. In mid-November 2001, lawyers opened the will. According to the will, Generosa would be disinherited upon Ted's death. However, the will had been newly drafted, and Ted had not yet had time to sign it, so Jenny received half of Ted's estate, while the other half was transferred to a charity. This situation provided a strong motive for the murder, as Generosa and Daniel believed it was better to be an extremely wealthy widow than to receive nothing. The police wanted to discuss the situation with Generosa and Daniel. However, they refused to cooperate. The couple isolated themselves in a villa, avoided all interaction, and hired highly skilled lawyers. The media covered the event extensively. Although their lawyers advised them to stay away from journalists, the couple chose to ignore this advice. Daniel quickly divorced his wife and married Generosa just 1 day later. Instead of being upset about her husband's death, she seemed quite at peace with what was happening. Ted's murder, which was reported in every newspaper and television station, attracted national attention. Daniel and Generosa's lawyers were criticized for their extensive efforts to shield the couple from the investigation and trial. During this time, Daniel and his children moved into another mansion owned by Generosa. Soon, they started spending lavishly thousands of dollars a day. They thoughtlessly squandered the money accumulated through decades of Ted's hard work. Fortunately, this lavish lifestyle lasted less than a month, as Daniel had to return to Long Island to stand trial for drunk driving. Police officers suspected that the Daniel might attempt to escape to another country, so they were cautious. For several days, he was unable to stay silent and seemed to enjoy the media attention, even if it was connected to serious allegations. He was far from discreet. His wife, Generosa, moved in with him at their East Hampton home, where neighbors noted their loud behavior and frequent drinking sessions. Generosa was often seen intoxicated and behaving inappropriately, causing the couple to become a source of shame for the local elite community. The situation deteriorated further. By May 2002, Generosa started experiencing frequent fainting spells, and by June, she was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. While Daniel pleaded guilty to drunk driving and received a 1-year prison sentence. He was released in June 2003, hoping that the Ted case had died down, but the investigation was still ongoing. Throughout this time, it remained the focus of media attention. Although the investigation produced no direct evidence linking Daniel or Generosa to the crimes, circumstantial evidence suggested their involvement. Generosa and Daniel secretly installed video surveillance cameras in the mansion to keep an eye on Ted. The surveillance cameras were supposed to record the moment of the attack, but it was discovered that someone had erased the hard drive. This was a crucial clue, as only the two of them knew about the cameras. However, this information only added to the circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, Generosa's health was deteriorating as she battled cancer. Realizing that her time was running out, she made a will assigning her assets to her husband's children and a charitable foundation. She also allocated $2 million to her husband to cover his legal costs. In July 2003, Generosa and her children moved to another mansion. Generosa now wanted to spend her last moments with her loved ones. Just a month later, she passed away from her illness, leaving the children without parents for the second time. This led to a custody battle between their nanny and Ted's sister over the twins. For a time, the twins were separated. Gregory went to boarding school while Alexa stayed in East Hampton with the nanny. Eventually, Ted's sister won custody, and they moved to Huntsville, Alabama. Daniel was thrust into the spotlight when he was charged with the murder of Ted Ammon. The DA's office claimed that he had motive for the crime. They presented evidence that they believed was strong enough to convince a jury. When the trial began, Daniel's lawyers prepared extensively. With financial backing from Generosa, he was able to hire top experts. The police spent 9 months interviewing witnesses, all members of Daniel's inner circle. Among these witnesses, helped the police gather incriminating evidence against him. About a year before Ted's death, Daniel made some suspicious comments, stating that he would do anything to get money from Generosa, even if it meant committing murder. Daniel squandered all the money Generosa gave him to support his lavish lifestyle. After the murder, he bragged to some friends that he had killed Ted, excitedly recounting that Ted had begged for his life and even cried, but Daniel had shown no mercy. This story was later repeated by others, and he continued to brag about it for days. The prosecution faced a challenge with Daniel's alibi. On the night of the murder, his sister, who lived 60 kilometers away from the mansion, confirmed that he was with her. Initially, she supported this claim, but after further questioning by police, she provided new information. She stated that Daniel and a friend actually arrived at her place around 10 p.m. He took something from the attic and left around 2 a.m., returning only at 8 a.m. This revelation exposed several inconsistencies in his alibi, suggesting he had enough time to travel to East Hampton and back after killing Ted. Daniel's sister said she hugged him before he left that night and noticed something unusual about his leather jacket. He then stopped answering her questions and suddenly left. It is believed that he stopped by his sister's house to retrieve the murder weapon. Daniel then drove 45 minutes to Ted's house, went inside, and waited for Ted to arrive. The attack was sudden. While Ted was unconscious, Daniel struck him multiple times in the head, fracturing his skull and leaving him with no chance of survival. The next morning, Daniel returned to his sister's house, but she was awake and able to provide details about the time of the incident. This information was crucial to the prosecution, casting doubt on Daniel's alibi. Daniel's father reported that the day after the incident, he had a strange conversation with Daniel. It seemed like he was asking leading questions about how to hide an object so that it would never be discovered. The father, not fully understanding the situation, suggested sending the object to be recycled and offered several other ideas, not knowing that he had inadvertently helped a criminal dispose of a murder weapon. The prosecutor's office had gathered enough evidence and circumstantial information, so the police decided to question Daniel one last time just days before filing charges, hoping to get a confession by offering him a deal. On March 23, 2004, Daniel had still not confessed to the crime. Nearly 2.5 years after the murder, the media and public were waiting for updates, but there was still no major news. Daniel was charged with second-degree murder, which carried a sentence of up to 25 years. On the day of the trial, the prosecution introduced 2 new witnesses who had been in custody with Daniel after the attack. Prior to the hearing, the prosecution used these witnesses to obtain audio recordings of Daniel's testimony. In these recordings, Daniel describes how he violently attacked Ted with a baseball bat, intending to break all the bones in Ted's body. During the trial, Daniel's defense attorney claimed that Ted was promiscuous, saying that he was dating multiple women at the same time. The attorney wanted to imply that this lifestyle could lead to multiple potential suspects, suggesting that anyone could have had a reason to hurt Ted. Daniel unexpectedly decided to testify in his own defense, leading to a tense 5-hour standoff with the prosecutor. The situation attracted the attention of many journalists, adding to the pressure. The defense attorneys attempted to blame Generosa. Daniel admitted that Generosa had offered to kill Ted, but he refused. This defense strategy was intended to cast doubt on the jury by implying that Generosa could have been the real killer. However, it was difficult to determine Generosa's involvement and her true role in the violent crime. It is difficult to determine whether Generosa was involved in this violent crime and what her role may have been. The truth may never be known, as the secret was buried with her. 2 years after Ted's death, the jury spent the entire weekend deliberating. They finally returned a guilty verdict. Daniel Pelosi broke down in tears. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He still denies any involvement in the murder, maintaining his innocence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Angel Sawyer. Milton Sawyer was born in 1963 in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, where he lived his entire life. He grew up as an average child, playing in the woods and building huts. But he had a strong passion for collecting valuable and rare items, a trait he inherited from his father. This love for collecting eventually led him to open an antique store as an adult. Known as a treasure hunter, he bought and resold jewelry and other items, help him have an affluent life. He has a knack for finding rare treasures. However, Milton's personal life was not so smooth. He married in 2000 and had 3 children, but his relationship with his wife did not last. They eventually divorced. After the divorce, he devoted all his love to his children. He often took them out everywhere, both at work and in his free time. He is known to everyone as a father who deeply loves his children. For many years he was single and had little interest in dating, until 2011, when he met Angel Kissinger, a 28-year-old woman, while dropping his child off at school. They struck up a conversation, though at that time, Angel was married and had 4 children. Angel reassured Milton that she was in the process of divorcing her husband, although he was 10 years older than her, but they remained bonded by their shared experiences of raising multiple children and failed marriages. Milton had already settled his custody issues, with their children living alternately with him and their mother, while Angel was just beginning to arrange shared custody. After their first meeting, they started to develop a close relationship. By 2012, they were married. Angel quickly became interested in Milton's business, and when she first visited his antique shop, she noticed that the shelves were quite messy. She cleverly rearranged the items in the store. Milton loved it. He noticed that the shop looked better, and sales increased after rearrangement. However, the family's main job was not just to arrange the shelves of the antique shop. This family has 7 children, and they need to find a way to get along with all of them. They had been doing well until August 2, 2018, when a mysterious attacker takes the life of Milton, the city's most famous antique collector. At 2 a.m., Angel knocked on her neighbor's door, visibly shaken. She told her neighbor that an intruder had broken into her home and killed her husband, Milton. She was still tied up and unable to call for help herself. The neighbor immediately contacted emergency services by dialing 911. She informed the dispatcher that Angel was crying and claimed that Milton had been murdered. There was blood on Angel's face, and she mentioned that the attacker had a gun. She also said that the intruder was trying to steal money and jewelry, but Angel managed to escape. While waiting for the police to arrive, the neighbor stayed with Angel. When law enforcement officers reached the scene, they found the front door locked, but noticed that the back door was open. They entered through the back and proceeded to the bedroom, where Angel said that the injured Milton. Inside, the room was in complete disarray. The contents of the cabinets were strewn across the floor, and a significant amount of gold and silver jewelry was scattered everywhere. The chaos made it difficult for the police officer who arrived on the scene to locate Milton right away. It took some time to find Milton, who was discovered in the bathroom. He was a large man, taking up most of the floor space, and showed no signs of life. Doctors declared him dead. However, after further investigation, the police could not determine what had caused his death. Milton's hands were bound with tape behind his back, and he was lying face down in a small pool of blood. Police quickly realized that there was very little blood present, so he could not have been seriously injured. Only minor wounds were found on his body, which were not life-threatening. To uncover the cause of Milton's death, a detailed examination of his body and the crime scene was necessary. Meanwhile, Angel was taken to a medical facility for care, with the police staying with her for protection, as it was feared that the attacker might return. Milton's family was informed of the incident at around 3 o'clock in the morning. They were shocked by the news and could not believe that Milton, who was always friendly, could have had enemies. At the crime scene, police discovered signs of a robbery. All the furniture drawers were pulled out, and items were scattered on the floor. Milton showed no head injuries, and there was no shell casing found. Posture of the body showed signs of a struggle, and in such a situation, an attacker would have left behind DNA. Forensic experts were on the lookout for any evidence, including fingerprints. After conducting an autopsy, forensic experts concluded that Milton likely died from asphyxiation. The position of the body, with his hands tied behind his back and pressure from a hard surface under his chest, made breathing difficult. If he had been unconscious, the position could have been fatal. During the investigation, police questioned neighbors, but were unable to gather any significant information. Locals had only heard a loud noise and then silence. Detectives found no physical evidence at the scene. They found that there was a key in the back door lock, which was odd because keys would normally be kept in a safe place. However, Angel stated she had left the key outside on the porch so her children could use it if she returned home late. It was possible that the criminal had found the key and used it. Detectives collected the key as evidence, as it might contain the killer's fingerprints. Angel sustained a minor injury to the right side of her forehead, which was not life-threatening. She explained that on the night of the incident, only she and Milton were at home, while their 2 children were staying with friends. Around midnight, she went to the kitchen for a snack. When she opened the bedroom door, she saw a man dressed in black standing in the hallway. He approached her and demanded to know where the valuable jewelry was, claiming he was aware of the large amount stored in the house. She believed this was a targeted attack, as her husband Milton was known as the city's leading gold jewelry dealer. After taking the valuables, the robber struck she on the head, leaving her stunned. She fell, confused and unsure of what to do. Then, he took advantage of her state, binding her hands and feet with tape. A few hours went by, but Milton still hadn't emerged from the bathroom. She couldn't see what was happening with him. After a while, she decided to loosen the tape to free herself and stand up. She immediately ran to a neighbor's house for help. She also shared with the detectives about a suspicious person. Around 7 p.m. that night, they met a young man who wanted to sell a TV. However, Milton, the experienced antique dealer, suspected that the TV was stolen and refused to buy it. The young man was displeased and left, possibly holding a grudge against Milton. Angel recognized the young man. His name was Dylan. He had come with his girlfriend, and Milton had previously conducted business with him multiple times. She suspected that Dylan and his girlfriend was involved in drug use. She provided a detailed description of them. However, as detectives searched for Dylan and his girlfriend, they noticed several unusual aspects of the case. They checked the recordings from surveillance cameras near the house and found no suspicious people visiting the family. Strangely, a significant amount of money and jewelry remained untouched. not even the obvious items. This behavior is unusual for a robbery. Typically, thieves take everything they can find, especially if they know the victims have valuable items. The selective theft suggested that either no strangers had entered the house, or the motive behind the crime was not merely financial gain. The suspects, Dylan and his girlfriend, were arrested and charged with trafficking in illegal substances. During questioning, detectives put pressure on them and turned to talking about the attack involving Milton. But they did not understand what was being discussed. It seemed they were genuinely surprised. They were then told directly that they were suspected of killing Milton, but they provided an alibi about selling TVs. They confirmed that they had met him in the evening. However, this did not connect them with the subsequent tragic incident. According to them, they sold the TV to someone else. He even immediately provided his mobile phone so that the police could verify his words. After checking the geolocation of the cell phone, investigators confirmed that Dylan and his girlfriend were indeed in a different area at the time of the attack. At around midnight, they were too far from the crime scene, and this confirmed their alibi. Thanks to this, all suspicions against them were removed. The detectives returned to the very beginning of the investigation. They were unable to guess who had attacked Milton. However, the next day, they received new information from the forensic expert. The expert carefully reviewed the case, consulted with colleagues, and came to the conclusion that his initial assumption on positional asphyxia was incorrect. Milton could not have suffocated under his own weight. It was clear he had been intentionally strangled. A fractured ribcage found during the investigation supported the forensic expert's theories. However, this evidence does not match Angel's testimony, raising many questions and doubts. The police thoroughly investigated Angel and Milton's marriage, discovered that it was not as perfect as it appeared. Conversations with Angel's friends and family did not support these suspicions. They described the couple as having a long and seemingly happy marriage. No one believed that Angel could have had a motive for the attack. However, some of Milton's relatives described Angel as a very selfish woman. She was attractive and charismatic, but she always viewed herself as superior to others. This attitude attracted Milton because he really likes her confidence. He was willing to give her expensive jewelry from his antique shop, buy her cars, and always cater to her every whim. Milton's brother, David, informed detectives that after 5 years of marriage, their demands began to escalate. Angel increasingly shows no appreciation for the gifts and luxuries Milton gives her. Milton feels confused and has talked to David many times about the possibility that his wife, Angel, is unfaithful. In late 2017, suspicions arose when Angel was involved in an accident. Although she sustained only minor injuries, she was diagnosed with pain in her shoulders and hips. She went to a local physical therapy clinic, where a 38-year-old doctor, Isaac Melcher, prescribed her daily exercises. Initially, she attended her appointments in regular clothes, but after a few sessions, her behavior changed dramatically. She started to take great care in her appearance, showering thoroughly before each visit, wearing expensive perfume, dressing in her best outfits, and put on makeup. This change makes her husband, Milton, suspect that she is preparing for a date with Isaac. He attempted to confront Angel about her unusual behavior, but she consistently denied any wrongdoing, insisting that she always dressed nicely because she wanted to look her best in all situations. Milton's suspicions continued to intensify. He became more sensitive to family issues, partly because he was religious. He is a good and trustworthy man, always honest with his wife. Therapy doctor Isaac seems to be the same. Isaac attended church regularly and was a wonderful husband and father of 3. Those who knew him acknowledged this. When police approached Isaac to talk about new details in the case, he revealed that Milton had been visiting the hospital frequently and had had many arguments with him involving Angel. Milton was an extremely jealous husband who often raised his voice during phone calls. Although Isaac denied having an affair with Angel, but the police still asked him to provide his cell phone for their investigation. However, he told them an unbelievable story. His phone fell into the water right before the robber broke into Milton's house, so he was forced to throw it away. After the murder, Isaac went to Walmart and bought a new cell phone. This action made detectives suspicious, as they did not think it was a coincidence. Isaac is believed to have had an affair with Angel and then purchased a new phone shortly after Milton's death. Detectives suspect that the missing phone may contain vital evidence linking Isaac to the murder. Furthermore, the loss of the phone would make it difficult to determine his whereabouts at the time of the incident. Isaac likely didn't realize that the police could have verified their assumptions by checking Angel's mobile phone. When she was taken in for questioning, she stated that her husband Milton was very jealous. She always dresses gorgeously and used jewelry to highlight her beauty, which attracted the attention of many men. However, she insisted that Milton overreacted and insisted that she did nothing excessive. She also denied any involvement in the crime. After questioning, the officers had no grounds to keep her in custody, so she was released. Investigators checked Isaac's alibi, which stated that he was at Walmart at the time of the murder to purchase a new cell phone. However, they obtained CCTV footage of the store and learned that he was not featured in it. Additionally, there was no receipt to confirm his purchase. At this point, investigators believed they had enough reason to search Isaac's house. They obtained a search warrant on August 8 and found his wife at home. She informed them that he had moved out of state and that she did not know of his relationship with Angel. Moreover, she could not confirm where he was on the night of the murder. She knew he was not home, but could not specify if he had gone to the store. Isaac's wife mentioned that he had traveled to visit his mother, which raised further concerns. This led to speculation that he might have sensed trouble and fled. Although he was not present, the police began searching his home, but found no useful information or evidence. They then reached out to Angel to find out where Isaac might be. She informed investigators that Isaac had reached out to her through social media. She said he was just asking about her, which prompted them to ask for her cell phone to check. She appeared reluctant to comply, which raised further concerns. If she was willing to discuss her communication with Isaac, why was she hesitant to share the details? Detectives checked her phone and immediately found a conversation between her and him. However, the name used there was Dustin, which detectives recognized as Isaac's middle name. In the messages, he referred to Angel as his beloved, indicating a romantic relationship between them. The police returned the phone to Angel, and at that exact moment, she received a new message. She refused to disclose its contents, right in front of the officers, deleted it. Any suspicion of her involvement in the crime has now become clearer. The focus turned to understanding and proving her role in the attack. To investigate further, detectives seized her phone. 10 days into the investigation, police received crucial evidence from a man named Lewis, who called the department and identified himself as Isaac's mentor. Lewis explained that from the first time Angel came to see Isaac, she showed interest in he and it seemed like she was flirting with he. Lewis said Isaac rejected her flirting words for a long time because it was against the rules. However, one day he entered the treatment room to find her completely naked, and he could not resist her. Then, they began a romantic relationship in the months leading up to Milton's murder. She told he that her husband, Milton, would never allow them to be together, portraying Milton as jealous and controlling. Isaac felt compelled to save her. Together, they devised a plan to eliminate her abusive husband, Milton. They agreed to stage a home invasion, with Isaac using a key that Angel had placed by the door. During the attack, they intended to be in the bedroom. Late at night, around midnight, Isaac broke into house carrying a gun. He entered the bedroom and attacked Milton, strangling until Milton stopped resisting. During this chaos, Angel tried to intervene, but accidentally hit her head on the nightstand, which was an unforeseen incident but helped in making the attack appear real. Isaac then staged the crime scene to look like a robbery by throwing items on the floor and filling a pillowcase with jewelry before making his escape. He planned to remove any DNA evidence related to Milton from his body, and Angel had a similar plan. Before the police arrived, Isaac disposed of all evidence from the attack in garbage cans scattered around the city and disposed of his phone. This information came from a police informant named Lewis, which needed verification. The investigators convinced Lewis to record a phone call with Isaac to gather evidence of his confession. Over 3 phone calls, they confirmed that Isaac had an affair with Angel and was responsible for the attack. The police arrested 38-year-old Isaac Dustin Melcher at his home in North Carolina. He was taken to the station for questioning, but refused to cooperate. Consequently, the detectives turned their attention to 45-year-old Angel. They informed her that they had arrested Milton's killer and asked her to come to the station to identify him. Upon her arrival, she was also detained and taken in for questioning. Angel finally admitted that she knew about Isaac's plan. He wants to get rid of her husband, Milton, who is destroying their relationship. However, she said that she tried to stop him. He began to behave aggressively, making she worry about the safety of herself and her children. Therefore, she decided not to intervene in the murder. The police discovered that it was all a lie and that the two had planned the crime together. In fact, she was the manipulator, inciting the attack. She sees herself as a victim, while Milton is seen as a cruel tyrant. Therefore, she tries to arouse pity and noble feelings in Isaac. In the end, he accepts the role of a knight, rescuing her from captivity. Isaac is intelligent and rational, but love blinds him. However, the prosecutor's office was in trouble because much of the evidence against Angel was circumstantial. During questioning, she labeled Isaac a crazed stalker and that she wanted nothing to do with him. Detectives informed Isaac of her true nature, prompting him to realize he was being used. Furious, he decided to testify against Angel in exchange for a plea deal. Isaac pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. However, the most important condition of the deal was that he promised to testify against Angel. During Angel's trial in September 2021, the prosecutor's office argued that she was not motivated by financial motives because she and Milton did not have a life insurance policy. Additionally, the house they lived in was Milton's property and had been purchased before they were married, meaning it would not be divided or given to her in the event of his death. During her conversations with investigators, Angel revealed that she felt trapped in a loveless marriage. The prosecutor claimed that Angel did not want to be known as a twice-divorced woman and believed that killing Milton would be the better option. On September 16, 2021, Isaac testified against Angel. He claims that she first made him fall in love with her. Then she took advantage of his sympathy and made him hate Milton by telling him about the abuse she suffered. Under her manipulation, he is willing to do anything to save her from suffering, but in reality, he is just a pawn in her hands. Although Angel did not testify during the trial, but she maintained her innocence throughout. However, Isaac's testimony ultimately sealed her fate. All 12 jurors found Angel Sawyer guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Milton's antique shop never found a new owner and eventually closed. Currently, both Angel and Isaac remain in prison. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will delve into a new case. The case of Bridget Frisbee. Bridget Frisbee was born in December 1993 in Katy, Texas, USA. Shortly after her birth, her parents abandoned her, and she was placed in an orphanage. When Bridget was 18 months old, Robert Frisbee and Catherine visited the orphanage. After years of trying without being able to have children, they decided to make Happy the baby abandoned by her parents. Catherine had always longed for a daughter. and from the moment she first met Bridget, she felt a deep connection. Without hesitation, Robert and Catherine decided to adopt Bridget. From then on, they providing Bridget with a family full of love and protection. Bridget was an active and kind-hearted child. From a young age, she developed a passion for horseback riding, poetry, and painting. Her positive and friendly nature helped her make many friends. Her adoptive parents often wondered how her biological parents could have abandoned such a wonderful child. However, despite her cheerful demeanor, Bridget faced significant challenges throughout her life. When Bridget was 10 years old, her adoptive mother passed away after battling a long-term illness for several years, despite always being cared for and encouraged by family. Catherine's death was a devastating loss for Bridget, who had seen Catherine as her real mother. During this difficult period, father and daughter grew closer, supporting each other as they navigated their grief. Robert deeply loved his daughter, and over the years, they built a warm and trusting relationship. As Bridget grew older, her rebellious nature became more and more evident. Robert struggled to keep up with her boundless energy, but she continued to embrace life with enthusiasm. Despite their differences, they maintained a close and loving relationship. Bridget was an active and lively student. She excelled academically and had ambitious dreams for the future, much to her father's delight. She aspired to attend college and build an independent life. On April 3, 2011, a group of teenagers were riding motorcycles along the edge of a Texas forest. This was a strip of land planted near the family's home. The area was usually used for riding dirt bikes and ATVs. Towards the end of the trip, the young athletes saw something suspicious off to the side of the trail. Venturing slightly into the woods, they made a horrifying discovery: a human body. Realizing the importance of preserving evidence, the group refrained from disturbing the scene. They observed blood on the girl's clothes and head, and it appeared that someone had attempted to hide the body by covering it with branches and leaves. However, the concealment was so poorly done that the body was visible even from a considerable distance. The police were immediately called to the scene, where the high school students waited for their arrival. None of the teens recognized the girl. The officers discovered that the victim had no identification, making it impossible to determine her identity at the time. During a cursory inspection of the area, the detectives assumed that the massacre had been carried out right there. The victim had been attacked and left in the forest. A forensic examination later confirmed that there were no signs of abuse violence, and all of her belongings, including valuables, were still with her. This ruled out robbery and abuse assault as motives, so they suspect that the attack was related to personal hostility or jealousy. The police immediately investigated the victim's identity. They noticed the victim appeared to be just under 20 years old. She was found lying on the ground, partially covered with branches and dirt. A large wound to the head was the only visible injury, indicating a fatal blow that killed the young schoolgirl on the spot. The wound was caused by a 9mm bullet at close range, which passed through her head. Near the body, investigators discovered an empty 9mm ammunition box. This was the only clue with which the detectives had to start searching for the culprit of the tragedy. While examining the crime scene, investigators noticed another peculiar detail. A few meters from the body, a small patch of the forest floor had its top layer of soil removed, leaving a bare spot. It appeared as though someone had started digging, but stopped abruptly. The reason for this was unclear. It was possible the killer had intended to bury the body but was interrupted or frightened away. However, the police acknowledged that this detail might have been unrelated to the girl's murder. To identify the deceased, investigators began reaching out to local residents. They went door to door, speaking with people who lived near the forest. News of the brutal murder quickly spread through the community, causing widespread concern. The police used the media to inform the public about the incident, which had occurred just a few hundred meters from some homes, leaving families horrified. Such a crime was unprecedented in their peaceful area. Residents were asked if they had noticed any suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar individuals heading toward the forest or behaving strangely. Meanwhile, deputies from the sheriff's department visited dozens of homes and interviewed numerous witnesses. However, no valuable information emerged on the first day of the investigation. Just as the officers were beginning to lose hope of finding a helpful lead, a woman from a nearby settlement provided a significant clue. She explained that the night before the body was found, she had been relaxing with friends in her backyard. Between 2 and 3 a.m., she heard a loud noise resembling an explosion. Her friends also confirmed hearing the same sound. According to the witness's recollections that night, no one attached much importance to this extraneous noise, since she lived next to a forest area and knew that it could have been hunters. Moreover, the noise seemed distant, and she wasn't even sure if it was a bullet sound. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, no additional information surfaced. The police returned to the station and began searching their database to determine if the murdered woman was listed as missing. Given the circumstances, it was likely her details had been added only a few days earlier. Unfortunately, during these checks, officers were unable to identify the victim found in the forest. The case took a turn the next day. On the morning of April 4, 2011, Robert Frisbee went to the sheriff's department to report that he hadn't been able to contact his 17-year-old daughter, Bridget, for over a day. He was deeply concerned, especially after hearing about a body discovered in the nearby forest, not far from their home. At this time, the identity of the body remained unknown, so detectives immediately communicated with Robert. He revealed that he had been unable to reach his adopted daughter, Bridget, through her mobile phone or social media since the previous evening. Bridget had planned to spend the night at a friend's house 2 days before Robert reported her missing to the police. Robert believed she was mature enough to make such plans and assumed she had intended to meet her boyfriend that night. He didn't object to her having fun. However, after leaving home, Bridget failed to contact her father. She didn't confirm her arrival, let him know how she was, or even say goodnight. This lack of communication was unusual, as their family shared a warm and trusting relationship. According to Robert, such behavior seemed uncharacteristic and caused concern. Robert was aware of an unwritten rule often followed by the police: they are unlikely to act on a disappearance reported earlier than 24 hours after the person goes missing. With this in mind, he decided to wait before going to the police station. During this time, he repeatedly tried contacting his daughter on her mobile phone and reaching out to her friends, but all his efforts were met with silence, without any clue. When Robert provided detectives with a description of his daughter, they immediately noted Bridget's striking resemblance to the body they had found. Robert was shown photographs from the scene of the incident and heartbreakingly confirmed that it was Bridget. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she left home. The discovery was an emotional devastation for Robert. Years earlier, he had lost his wife to a serious illness and still deeply missed her. His daughter had been his source of hope and joy, but now that light was gone too. With this confirmation, the victim was officially identified. The police then questioned Robert to piece together the events. Robert said that he last saw his daughter on April 2, 2011, when she was still at home. He had just bought her a pair of soft blue leggings, which she tried on before going out for a walk. That evening, Bridget's friend, Kendall Suo, came over for dinner with the family. After the meal, the two girls asked Robert to take them to a party. He agreed, but when they arrived, they discovered that the club was closed to young people. Unable to attend, Robert took the two girls home at around 10 p.m. Kendall left shortly after, picked up by another young man who planned to return home by midnight. Bridget and Kendall had planned to go to the bus stop to meet Bridget's boyfriend. However, Robert did not wait for the young man to arrive and went to bed. He set his alarm for midnight, and when he woke up, he found Bridget still at home. She told him that her friend was late, which worried her. Robert reassured his daughter and told her to go to bed. After seeing Bridget start getting ready for bed, he locked the door and went back to sleep. At around 3 a.m., Robert woke up feeling uneasy. He checked around the house and realized that Bridget was not there. Thinking she might have gone out with friends, he left the garage door unlocked so she could get inside without waking him. When he tried to call her to ask when she would be home, he realized that he couldn't find his phone. He thought that his daughter might have taken his mobile phone so as not to leave home without a means of communication. He tried using the internet and social media to contact her, but she didn't respond to his calls or messages. Concerned, Robert attempted to track his phone's location through GPS to ensure his daughter was safe, but he couldn't manage to do so. His anxiety grew as he realized she was unlikely to stick to her curfew. He decided to wait until morning, hoping she would return and resolve the situation on her own. Unfortunately, when he woke up on next day, Bridget was still not home. Robert began calling several of her friends and contacts, but no one could tell him exactly where she was or what had happened. By that evening, he read online that a group of teenagers on motorcycles had discovered the body of an unidentified girl near his family home. This news made Robert even more anxious. Although he tried to push away the distressing thoughts, the possibility that his daughter might be the victim tormented him. The next morning, he went to the police station and confirmed that the murdered girl was indeed his daughter. The devastating news left him shattered. He became unable to sleep or focus on work and even started keeping a loaded weapon by his bedside. After Robert's testimony, the detectives finally had their first lead. The suspect was Kendall So, a school friend of Bridget's, with whom she had spoken on the evening before her disappearance. Bridget's father stated that he had known Kendall for a long time and had never observed any signs of aggression or dangerous behavior in him. According to Robert, Kendall was a responsible high school student with no history of criminal activity or bad influences. He was well behaved, a good student, and always treated Bridget with respect. Her father felt confident trusting his daughter with Kendall, believing she was safe in his company. Robert was certain that Kendall could not be the killer. In contrast, Robert believed that a more likely suspect was Bridget's ex-boyfriend, Valley Jonathan Eason. From the start, Bridget and Jonathan had a troubled relationship. Jonathan was a bad influence and was suspected of using soft banned substance. He was frequently involved in problematic incidents and had a history of provoking conflicts. From the beginning of their acquaintance, he often displayed threatening behavior. Later, a third person came into the picture, Zach Richards, another old friend of Bridget's, with whom she had started dating shortly before her death. Based on Robert's testimony, investigators quickly identified several suspects who needed to be thoroughly investigated. Detectives immediately began questioning these young men to determine their whereabouts at the time of the murder. The first person they approached was Kendall, one of the last people to see Bridget alive. Kendall had no prior issues with the law. When contacted by the police, he willingly agreed to come to the station and provide his statement. He confirmed Robert's account, explaining how he visited Bridget's house and then went to the club with Bridget. According to Kendall, he left the house shortly after Robert dropped them off at the club. He claimed that their plans had suddenly changed because another friend was to join them. Kendall expressed his willingness to cooperate with the investigation and agreed to provide DNA samples and fingerprints as needed. He also mentioned that on the evening in question, Bridget was upset due to a recent argument with her ex-boyfriend, Jonathan Eason. Bridget and Jonathan had been in a relationship for several months, but it had been troubled from the start. Jonathan often accused her of cheating, which eventually led to their breakup. However, he seemed to hold a grudge against her and would use any chance to hurt her feelings. The situation was further complicated because they attended the same class. The police verified Kendall's alibi, which checked out. Despite this, they kept him on the list of suspects and decided to scrutinize some of his statements further. The next person the detectives investigated was Bridget's ex-boyfriend Jonathan. Several witnesses from Bridget's close circle had mentioned him during their interviews. When the police attempted to contact Jonathan, they couldn't reach him. They decided to visit his home, but upon arrival, they found the house empty, with signs suggesting it had been abandoned in a hurry. This discovery raised serious concerns. The back wall of the family home was covered with round holes resembling bullet holes. Based on the number of holes, investigators concluded that the bullet holes were either from a semi-automatic weapon or the attacker has been deliberately impacting the front of the house for a long time. During their investigation, they discovered that about a week before Bridget's murder, Jonathan had been targeted by 3 unknown individuals in a car. They had opened attack on him, but he managed to hide in his room, avoiding injury. Following the attack, Jonathan reported the incident to the police. Despite the investigators' best efforts, the case remained unsolved. The only evidence collected at the scene were spent cartridges and several bullets. Neighbors revealed that Jonathan moved out the day after the attack, fearing for his safety. The police suspected that these events might be connected. On March 14, the active phase of the search for Jonathan began. He became the main suspect in this case. By that time, detectives had already managed to visit the school where he studied. Bridget also studied there. The administration reported that Jonathan had not been in class in recent days. Investigators decided to talk to other students from his class. Police officers tried to find out where Jonathan went after the attack. Detectives met Alexander Olivieri, who introduced himself as a close friend of Bridget. According to him, they had recently met, and since then, they often communicated. Alexander immediately said that during her relationship with Jonathan, Bridget repeatedly feared for her life and health, as Jonathan behaved aggressively. Even after their breakup, Jonathan continued to pursue her. They often saw each other at school, and Jonathan did not miss the opportunity to offend her. All this often ended in quarrels and confrontations. Bridget just wanted to forget about the relationship and the unpleasant breakup, but her ex-boyfriend prevented this with all his might. According to Alexander, Jonathan was capable of causing harm to Bridget. Investigators tried to find out where Alexander was on the night of Bridget's murder. According to him, he was supposed to meet her that very night. They were going to pick up her boyfriend, Zach Richards, from the bus station. Zach was returning from visiting relatives who lived in a neighboring state. Alexander claimed that he arrived late to Bridget's house with another friend named Alan Perez. Bridget had promised to wait for them near the house, but he did not see her anywhere. She ignored their calls, so they left, assuming she had either already gone to bed. They met Zach and drove around the city for several hours before returning home at around 5 a.m. According to the forensic expert, by that time, Bridget had already been killed. Alexander learned of Bridget's death from the news. Detectives then questioned Alan, who told a similar story. However, his version slightly differed. He claimed that after meeting Zach, they played computer games all night and did not drive around the city. These discrepancies raised suspicions. Detectives added Alexander and Alan to the list of suspects, as their stories did not align, and no one could confirm their alibis. Nevertheless, Jonathan remained the main witness investigators wanted to question. Detectives quickly discovered that Jonathan's mother had not left the city after the attack on their home. Instead, she had moved in with a family friend for a while her son was sent to relatives in Austin, Texas. Law enforcement officers quickly found Jonathan's mother, who admitted that her son often got into trouble because of his bad character. She confirmed that the attack on the house was clearly directed against him, as the bullets were aimed at the side of the house where his room was. According to her, Jonathan had gotten into a fight before the attack, so the attackers were most likely connected to this incident. Unfortunately, it was not possible to prove this during the investigation. The relationship between Jonathan and his mother was far from ideal. Despite sending him to Austin, she did not keep in touch with him and did not know his exact whereabouts. However, she provided the police with an address to help them begin their search for Jonathan. Help for the investigation came from an unexpected source. Alan's lawyer approached the police and stated that his client had important information regarding the case. Alan was willing to provide this information in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Detectives considered the information potentially useful and agreed to the terms. According to Alan, there was a direct connection between Bridget's murder and the drive-by attack at Jonathan's house. Alan revealed that both he and Alexander had joined the National Guard, where they learned how to handle weapons. After mastering basic skills, Alexander continued his education at school and met Bridget. Bridget confided in Alexander about her problems with her ex-boyfriend, Jonathan. Together, they came up with a solution. According to Alan, in the incident that happened at Jonathan's house, it was Bridget who directly acted. Alex used his semi-automatic weapon, while Alan was also present in the car but only as an observer. Unfortunately for the entire group, Bridget started talking too much, putting everyone at risk of being exposed. On April 2, 2011, Alexander planned to meet Bridget to confront her about how her loose talk had nearly jeopardized them all. Considering his training in the National Guard and aspirations for a career in the military, Alexander feared Bridget's behavior could ruin his future. Meanwhile, Jonathan had already reported the situation to the police, and an active investigation was underway. Before that, after completing his training, Alexander began carrying a 9mm Beretta in a holster under his clothes. That evening, Alexander and Alan went to pick up Bridget from her house. They convinced her to get into the car by pretending they will to pick up her boyfriend Zach from the bus station. Initially, Bridget refused to go, so Alexander followed her into the house, determined to get her into the car by any necessary. While this was happening, Alan hid in the back seat of the Chevrolet Suburban under a large blanket. Eventually, Alexander managed to persuade Bridget to get into the car. They drove to an isolated area. On the way, Alexander started to put pressure on Bridget and accused her of the fact that her chatter could cost them all dearly. Upon arriving at the secluded location, they walked to a nearby wooded area. Alexander brought a shovel and flashlight and, together with Bridget, entered the forest. After some time, Alan got out of the car and quietly followed them, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen by Bridget. According to Alan, Alexander forced Bridget to dig, intimidating her and insisting it was urgent. While they were digging, Alexander suddenly pulled out a weapon and aimed it at the back of Bridget's head. Alan initially thought Alexander was trying to scare Bridget as a way of teaching her a lesson, but to his shock, Alexander pulled the trigger, killing her instantly. After the murder, Alexander hurried back to the car, taking the shovel and flashlight with him. He destroyed Bridget's phone and discarded the weapon, likely somewhere in the forest. Alan was stunned and confronted Alexander, angrily accusing him of what he had done. However, Alexander threatened Alan, warning him to stay silent or face consequences. Alexander then took all the items involved in the murder back to his home. Later, around 4 a.m., they picked up Bridget's boyfriend Zach from the bus station as originally planned. That night, Alexander invited a third friend to spend the night at his place. The following day, Alexander convinced Alan to work together to create a shared alibi. They agreed to stick to their story when speaking with the police. Alexander believed this plan would deceive the detectives. To further mislead the investigation, he decided to shift suspicion onto Bridget's argumentative ex-boyfriend, Jonathan. Alan admitted that he and Alexander had willingly participated in an attack at Jonathan's house to help Bridget. However, Alexander hadn't anticipated that Bridget would telling others about the incident. According to Alan's confession, Alexander saw no other solution than to kill Bridget to protect his future. Later, investigators questioned Zach, Bridget's boyfriend. Zach confessed that he had known about the attack at Jonathan's house. He also confirmed that Bridget had started sharing the story with others. Bridget had even considered posting about it on social media to intimidate Jonathan, which enraged Alexander. He repeatedly begged Bridget to drop these plans, but she refused to listen. On the evening of the meeting, Zach knew Bridget was supposed to arrive with 2 friends, but when the car arrived, she wasn't in it. When asked about Bridget's whereabouts, Alexander said he couldn't reach her. A few days later, Zach learned of Bridget's death. Alexander Olivieri was immediately arrested, and during a search of his home, police were unable to find the weapon believed to have been used in the car attack, as well as the weapon used to kill Bridget. However, they did find instructions for a weapon model that matched the shell casings discovered at the crime scene. Investigators also recovered a shovel that Bridget had used to dig a hole in the forest before being shot. Her DNA was confirmed to be on it. A thorough inspection of Alexander's car revealed numerous fabric fibers. However, Alexander never admitted to his actions. Instead, he attempted to shift the blame onto Alan. At this time, the prosecutor's office presented strong evidence disproving his claims. During the investigation, video recordings from 2010 were uncovered, showing Alexander demonstrating his use weapon skills with the same type of weapon used to kill Bridget, and in the attack at Jonathan's house. FBI agents took an active part in the investigation. A few days before the trial, they presented the results of fiber analysis conducted on materials collected from Alexander's car. The fibers matched the artificial fur on the victim's clothing. Bridget had been wearing a bright and distinctive outfit, making it easy to trace the source of the fibers. Additional evidence has strengthened the case against Alexander. Alexander's lawyer advised him to remain composed during the trial. He chose not to testify and never confessed to the murder. His cold demeanor made him appear calculating and unfeeling. On August 1, 2012, Alexander was found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Bridget's father deemed the sentence fair and expressed hope that Alexander would never be released. As promised by the police, Alan was not prosecuted for any of the incidents described. Welcome back to our channel. Today we'll be exploring a new case, the case of Amanda Mangus. Amanda Mangus was a kind and friendly girl from a young age. She was sociable, had many friends, and treated others with warmth. However, she was not too trusting and remained quite selective in choosing her immediate environment. Amanda grew up in a small town called Delta, Ohio, in the United States, with a population of just 3,000 people. She had a passion for the humanities and a deep love for children, which inspired her to pursue a career as an elementary school teacher. Amanda paid great attention to education because she wanted to ensure financial stability for herself in the future. Her plan was to graduate from college, find a full-time job, and establish her career before starting a family. Unfortunately, reality turned out to be very different from Amanda's idealized dreams. Her parents' relationship was filled with constant conflict and eventually ended in divorce. Amanda was 13 years old at the time, and she chose to live with her father, Mike Mangus. Not long after, her father remarried a woman named Deborah, and the three of them began living together happily as a new family. Among her friends, Amanda had a special connection with a boy named James Ramey, whom she had known since kindergarten. They grew up together, attended the same school, and became inseparable. During their summer jobs, Amanda described James as a funny and nice young man. Over time, their friendship blossomed into romantic feelings, and they eventually began dating. Their relationship deepened after they graduated from school. Determined to be independent, she found a part-time job in the kitchen of a local restaurant while continuing her studies. Introducing James to her family did not go as she had hoped. Her family, including her stepmother Deborah, disapproved of James from the start and expressed concerns about their relationship. However, she was so in love that she dismissed all the warnings as exaggerations, believing she knew better than others what to do. Normally, the adults viewed the situation more rationally. James began acting oddly, but despite this, Amanda, still very young, pursued a serious relationship with him. Eventually, Amanda decided to move out of her family home and live with James in his apartment. After they moved in together, James's behavior took a drastic turn for the worse. Over time, he became increasingly controlling, constantly jealous, and frequently accused Amanda of infidelity. His behavior escalated into emotional abuse, and Amanda began to experience the worst fears her relatives had warned her about. Being inexperienced, Amanda didn't initially understand what was happening in her relationship. She wanted to leave James fairly quickly because of his controlling and manipulative nature, but fear held her back. James acted as though he had the right to control every part of her life, from her friends to the clothes she wore. Even small actions, like Amanda leaving the house to go to the store, would prompt James to call her within minutes. Things took an even darker turn when Amanda discovered she was pregnant. At first, James reacted with indifference, but his discontent grew as Amanda paid less attention to him. Even though James wanted her not to give birth to this baby, Amanda refused it and focused on becoming a mother. Preparing for motherhood demanded much of her attention, which caused further strain on their relationship, as she was no longer completely focused on James. James kept insisting that he didn't want the child and pressured Amanda. However, Amanda steadfastly refused to comply with his request. On May 21, 2016, she gave birth to a baby boy. By this time, her relationship with almost all her friends had deteriorated. James was present at the hospital during the birth, but which only added to the tension. Amanda wanted to reconnect with her relatives, but James intentionally prevented her from doing so. Her father and stepmother strongly disliked James, and every meeting with him led to arguments and heightened conflict. James's behavior was typical of a manipulator. As a result, Amanda's father and stepmother were unable to see their grandson when he was born. They only met him for the first time when he was 3 months old. During this period, Amanda could only communicate with her parents through messages and share photos of the baby, Winston. Over time, James became increasingly controlling and manipulative. Even minor issues would upset him, and he would escalate them into major conflicts. His most frequent tactic was accusing Amanda of infidelity, often suggesting that Winston was not his son. Amanda was deeply hurt by this behavior. She resisted James in every way she could, but her struggles extended beyond dealing with him. She was also battling postpartum depression and the hormonal changes common among young mothers. The situation continued to deteriorate until James escalated from verbal abuse to physical threats. One day, he held a knife to Amanda's throat and threatened to kill her. Despite everything, Amanda still believed she could save the family for her son's sake. She convinced herself that James's aggression was solely due to the challenges their family faced after the birth of their child. Amanda chose not to confide in her relatives about the incident, instead sharing her feelings with a few friends. James's manipulative behavior not only terrified her, but also strained her relationships with her loved ones, leaving her afraid to seek their support. This is what usually happens in such situations. Amanda's friends recognized that what she was enduring was far from normal. With the arrival of Winston, James's behavior became increasingly dangerous, posing a threat not only to Amanda, but also to Winston. So, her friends urged her to leave him. Amanda was seriously considering ending the relationship, but the decision wasn't easy for her. She vividly remembered how loving, caring, and gentle James had been at the start. They had been friends for years, and Amanda held on to the hope that the current issues were only temporary. She believed that, with time, everyone would adjust. Because of this, she repeatedly forgave James for his insults and even the physical violence he had begun using. On one evening following argument, James and Amanda decided to go to a bar to have a drink, cool off, and discuss their problems. Deborah came over to watch the baby, expecting to stay only a couple of hours. But after 3 hours, neither Amanda nor James had returned home. That night, James drank heavily, while Amanda stayed sober. She ended up driving them home but had barely gone 2 blocks when James insisted on taking over the wheel. At first, Amanda resisted, but James grew angry. To avoid escalating the situation, she reluctantly gave in. It ought to be a reckless decision. Neither James nor Amanda was wearing a seatbelt. Just a few hundred meters down the road, James crashed into a parked car. The impact was severe. James, who was driving, hit the steering wheel but escaped with minor injuries. Amanda, however, struck the windshield with great force, shattering it and sustaining deep cuts. Despite being clearly responsible for the accident, James immediately began blaming Amanda, hurling insults and accusing her of causing the crash. Amanda, bleeding and worried about the severity of her injuries, ignored his accusations, focused on stopping the bleeding and assessing her condition. James, however, completely lost control, escalating from verbal abuse to physical violence and attacking his injured girlfriend. After the incident, Amanda realized that James lacked any genuine feelings for her. He was a cruel person she needed to avoid. Acting decisively, she immediately wrote a statement for the police and removed James from all her contacts. Following the attack and the accident, Amanda called her father, Mike, asking him to take her and her child back home. Once reunited with her family, Amanda obtained a restraining order against James, feeling confident that she and her son were now safe. Back at her parents' house, Amanda resumed living with them as she had before. Determined to move on, she focused on leaving behind the toxic relationship and erasing James from her life altogether. She found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant popular in the small town, where many residents already knew her. Amanda began reconnecting with old acquaintances, meeting new people, and building new friendships. As a naturally outgoing person, she quickly became well-liked by the restaurant's patrons. Life slowly began to improve, and the pain of her past gradually started to fade. Amanda earned enough money to support herself and her child, and soon she started searching for an apartment to rent. Despite getting along well with her parents, their home was too small for her to truly begin the next chapter of her life. While working at the restaurant, Amanda met a young man named Curtis. They had gone to school together in the past, but had barely spoken back then. As they started talking, Amanda discovered that Curtis was kind and caring. Their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Curtis embraced Winston, often making it clear that he considered the boy a part of his family. This warmed Amanda's heart and gave her hope for the future. On March 13, 2017, Amanda officially announced their relationship on social media, changing her status to in a relationship to emphasize their commitment. That same day, Curtis moved in with Amanda, and they began living together as a family, along with Amanda's baby, her father, and her stepmother. They also making plans to rent an apartment and build a life together. Early the next morning, on Tuesday, March 14, 2017, Curtis left for work before 5 a.m. At home, only Amanda and Deborah were at home. Amanda was still in bed, and Winston was quietly in his crib. About an hour later, Deborah was startled by a loud bang that jolted her awake. Half asleep, she couldn't immediately determine what had happened. It sounded like either a sound of weapons or something heavy falling. Alarmed, Deborah got out of bed to investigate. She called out for Amanda, but instead of a response, she heard a strange noise. Immediately after that, she heard footsteps rushing toward her room. Believing that an intruder had entered the house, Deborah reacted swiftly. To protect herself, she locked her bedroom door and leaned against it to block entry. However, the intruder attacked at the door lock, causing a bullet to graze Deborah's thumb and narrowly missing a more serious injury. With the lock destroyed, the intruder kicked the door open and entered the room. He was a masked man holding a weapon and appeared agitated, scanning the room cautiously as though anticipating resistance. The man glanced at Deborah and demanded to know about Curtis. Upon seeing Deborah in her pajamas, he appeared momentarily confused. Deborah told him that Curtis had already left for work roughly half an hour earlier. This enraged the intruder further. He admitted to attack Amanda and warned that he wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who tried to stop him. He then demanded Deborah's obedience. The man ordered Deborah to retrieve Amanda's mobile phone and demanded she hand over the baby. When Deborah tried to protest, he silently but menacingly pulled the trigger, showing it clear that she had no choice. Realizing resistance was futile, Deborah removed Winston from the crib but did not hand him over to the stranger, saying that she would accompany the baby. She also gave the man Amanda's mobile phone, as he had demanded. The stranger aimed a weapon at the back of Deborah's head and forced her to leave the house without letting her change her clothes. Despite the cold weather, Deborah was barefoot and still wearing her pajamas. He made her get into a car. Once inside, he removed his mask, and Deborah recognized him. It was James. He told her he needed an escort to escape the city with Winston, planning to use her as a hostage. James demanded that she guide him along the safest route to avoid police patrols. A few hundred meters from the house, James ordered her to call an ambulance. He claimed that Amanda, who was injured and could still be saved, was inside the house. He insisted that Deborah report this to the ambulance. She complied and called 911, informing the dispatcher about the injured girl and giving Amanda's address. However, before she could provide more details, the dispatcher asked for additional information, and James grabbed the phone. The police arrived at the scene within a minute of receiving the call. Patrol officers were the first to respond and immediately noticed that the front door was unlocked. Upon entering the house, one officer heard an alarm and followed the sound to Amanda's room. There, they found Amanda lying in bed and still alive. At first, the officers suspected a self-harm attempt and asked Amanda where the weapon was. Amanda didn't know where the weapon was, and it wasn't anywhere nearby. It soon became clear that someone else had attacked her. Amanda then asked about her child. One officer noticed a crib in the room, but it was empty. When asked who had taken her son, Amanda managed to say James Ramey before losing consciousness. Despite the doctor's efforts to save her, Amanda was already in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital but later succumbed to her injuries. During this time, Curtis and Mike was at work and completely unaware of the events unfolding at home. Deborah was being held hostage and was unable to alert anyone about the situation. The police had limited information, but discovered that Deborah and 10-month-old Winston were likely being held hostage by the attacker. Right away, an alarm was raised to notify local residents of the danger. An armed criminal with hostages in a car was on the run. Meanwhile, Deborah, holding Winston, was in the car with James as he sped away from the city. James was determined to reach the airport and demanded Deborah's assistance. Throughout the drive, he was visibly anxious. When they approached a railroad crossing, the barriers began to close as a train was approaching. In his panic, James didn't stop but instead accelerated. The crossing was elevated, and the car hit it so hard that something broke. He managed to get across the tracks, but the crash damaged both the car and the barriers. James and the hostages stopped a short distance from the railway, as the car could no longer move. Realizing he was trapped and needed help, James used his mobile phone to call a friend. Soon, a van arrived with a woman and 2 children inside. James, Deborah, and the baby got into the van, and they were driven to a house at an unknown location, apparently the home of the van's driver. Inside the house, James's friend was present. James made Deborah sit on the couch with the baby while he paced nervously around the room, holding a weapon. Clearly agitated, he began formulating a plan to take his friend's van and continue his escape in an effort to leave the country. At one point, Deborah asked to use the bathroom. James agreed but insisted that his friend accompany her. However, the friend stayed outside the bathroom. Seizing the opportunity, Deborah attempted to escape through the bathroom window, but was unsuccessful. By this time, the woman who had taken them in the van and left the house with the children. She understood that the police could come here and was afraid that shooting would start. No one wanted to get hurt, especially with the children. James remained on edge as he hurriedly left with the hostages. He didn't trust anyone and suspected that his friend might contact the police. Nervous and tense, James drove while smoking a cigarette to calm himself and stay focused on the road. However, his lighter suddenly stopped working, prompting him to stop at the nearest gas station to buy a new one. Before leaving the van, James warned Deborah not to try anything foolish or she would be attacked. Inside the gas station store, James was captured on surveillance cameras for the first time since his escape. Security footage showed him looking visibly agitated, though at that moment, no one yet understood how dangerous him truly was. While walking through the store, an emergency alert suddenly sounded. It was a police warning, and a photo of James was displayed. Authorities informed local residents about the kidnapping of Deborah and the child. Additionally, they reported that Amanda had not survived the attack. She died in the hospital. Although James had personally harmed Amanda, but he seemed deeply shaken by the news of her death. He returned to the car with a lighter, refusing to leave. He stood there, lost in thought, contemplating his next move. James began speaking aloud. He stated he had only 5 bullets left, 1 intended for Winston, 1 for Deborah, and the other 3 to confront the police. He believed those bullets would be enough to overpower the police and then take their weapons. There was also a backup plan. If things didn't go as intended, James had kept 1 last bullet for himself. He resolved to either escape or take his end life if the escape failed. After making this horrifying statement, they continued driving. Deborah's anxiety deepened, sensing the growing danger. By the time the police arrived at the gas station, it was too late. James and the hostages had already left. The FBI soon took over the case. They were able to estimate James's direction, but remained several hours behind him. To stop James, the operation enlisted police officers from surrounding cities and even neighboring states. At this time, the case had now escalated to the federal level. In the following hours, no progress has been recorded. Deborah and Winston were still being held hostage by James, while the police carefully tracked their movements. A camera at another gas station, a few hundred kilometers from the previous one, captured the van driven by James's friend. James stopped there as well but forced Deborah to remain in the van, threatening to kill her if she attempted to seek help. Desperate, Deborah considered approaching a passerby to explain her situation, but she didn't even know her exact location. She realized they were far from home, where people might not be aware of the kidnapping and murder. Ultimately, she chose not to take the risk and placed her hopes in the police, trusting that they were doing everything possible to rescue her and Winston. James bought a can of beer, some chewing gum, and used the restroom. After he returned, Deborah asked to use the restroom as well. Since she looked suspicious without proper clothing and footwear, he gave her a jacket and sneakers. This was fortunate because it was cold outside. Once Deborah returned, James drove away from the scene with the hostages. The police still a pursuit and eventually located the car. A gas station worker, upon learning about the situation, contacted the authorities. On the road, James drove recklessly and regardless. At one point, Deborah tried to move closer to Winston in the back seat to shield him with her body if the attack began, but James prevented her. Winston remained in the back lie throughout the incident. James abruptly stopped the car and placed his child on his lap. Armed police officers approached and surrounded the in Fulton County, Indiana. Although James had previously made threats and behaved erratically, but finally he did not harm the hostages, police or himself. Instead, he peacefully handed Winston to the police and was taken into custody. Deborah and Winston's dangerous situation finally ends. Overwhelmed with relief, she couldn't even shed tears and fainted on the spot due to the intense stress. Amanda's funeral was held afterwards. She was cherished by many, and her funeral was attended by over 100 people who came to pay their respects. And she was cremated. The investigation revealed that James's erratic behavior was driven by simple jealousy. After seeing a social media post from Amanda stating that she was in a new relationship, he lost control of his emotions and couldn't calm down. James decided to deal with her after previously warning her. When she had dismissed his warnings, determined, he armed himself and went to Amanda's home, intending to catch her with another man. However, Curtis was no longer there, so James attacked only Amanda. If her new boyfriend had also been present, he likely would have faced the same fate. In the end, James confessed to all his crimes and was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 27 years. Deborah was astonished that Amanda managed to survive until the police arrived and helped investigators identify the attacker. Deborah still considers herself indebted to Amanda and has taken on the responsibility of raising Amanda's son. Winston is being cared for by Amanda's father and stepmother. Amanda's heartbreaking death still leaves everyone in deep mourning. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Chad Ensel. Chad was born and raised in Bismarck. He attended university, majoring in mechanical engineering and design. Upon graduation, he returned to Bismarck and began working as an engineer at a local company. Friends and acquaintances describe him as a simple and kind man. In addition to his engineering work, Chad is a coach for a youth baseball team. On weekends, he spends time coaching young athletes and playing sports. He always remains calm and is not someone who likes to cause trouble. His cheerful personality does not seem like someone who is suffering from mental problems or who is thinking about quitting life. On April 6, 2015, Chad shared on social media that he was dating a woman named Nikki, who is 3 years older than he is. Friends noted that he seemed very happy at that time. A year later, in 2016, they got married. Nikki had 2 teenage sons from a previous relationship and worked in transportation for a food company. She was confident and often posted selfies on her social media, with only a couple of photos featuring her sons. She has an erratic temperament and often expresses her frustration with store employees. This causes a lot of conflict, causing many people to choose to avoid communicating with her. In addition to her main job at a food company, Nikki also runs a small business that specializes in catering for events and celebrations, particularly in making sweets and baked goods. She has been successful in this field, with many appealing creations showcased on her social media pages. On the outside, she and Chad appear to be a successful couple. He works at a large company in a managerial position, while she balances her job at the food company with running her own business. They raised 2 children together, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until January 2, 2020, when Nikki had to call emergency services. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on January 2, 2020, 911 emergency services received a call. The incident took place 15 minutes from Bismarck, North Dakota, at a farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. The caller's name was Nikki. She said she had been unable to contact her husband Chad for several days and decided to visit him. However, when she arrived, she could not enter the house because it was filled with smoke. She couldn't see what was happening inside but believed her husband was there. Emergency responders, including paramedics, firefighters, and police officers, quickly arrived to help. Upon investigation, they discovered that the fire had started in the guest bedroom on the second floor, where Chad was thought to be. Firefighters swiftly extinguished the flames and later found the charred body of a man lying on the bedroom floor. He was completely naked and had some sort of weapon placed on the bed, but away from his reach. This suggests that someone moved the weapon there, as it was not possible for him to have injured himself and then moved the weapon on his own. Police quickly determined that Chad had inflicted the injuries on himself. However, the lack of burns from a weapon suggested that the injury was likely caused by a distant impact. It could have been caused by a gas heater, which is known to be a dangerous source of heat that can cause fires. Despite the risks, gas heating systems remain popular in the United States due to their affordability and convenience. When the police arrived at the basement, they found another source of ignition, a badly burned stove on the lower level. The stove may have overheated during use and become the starting point for the fire. The entire situation was riddled with inconsistencies. The crime scene looked like a poorly staged incident. The strange points in this case are becoming more and more clear. Chad and Nikki lived together and raised their children together. So why is she away from home for many days? This caught the attention of the police, who began questioning people close to the family. Chad's friends and co-workers said they had not seen him for days. This was strange because he was a department head and did not usually miss work. Chad was very responsible, so it was unusual for him to miss work. At the very least, he would have called his supervisor to let them know he could not come in. Concerns grew. Chad was last seen on December 30, 2019, when he was captured on surveillance cameras at a local bowling alley. The next day, he did not show up for work. His wife, Nikki, called the company to inform them that her husband was seriously ill and needed a few days to recover. January 1 was a holiday, but on Monday, everyone at the company expected him to return. Yet he did not appear. Co-workers decided to call Chad to check on him. However, they were unable to reach him, prompting them to call the police to report the situation. They subsequently requested a welfare check on him. At approximately 1:20 p.m. on January 2, 2020, the police arrived at Chad's home. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. After waiting for a while and looking through the windows, they saw nothing unusual. The house was quiet. They did not conduct a thorough search or enter the home, believing they did not have the authority to do so. They assumed he had gone out to celebrate the holidays. They reported back to Chad's company that he was not home and that they could not assist further. They then left. Chad's co-workers suspected something was wrong, so they contacted his wife, Nikki. She stated that she was at work, but promised to check on him as soon as she got off. At 5:30 p.m., she called 911 and reported that she could not enter the house due to a strong smell of smoke, particularly in the room where Chad's body was found. Forensic scientists uncovered clear signs of arson. A mattress had been burned, possibly by a nearby gas heater. There were cigarette butts and empty whiskey bottles on the floor. However, the police were particularly puzzled as to why Nikki and the children were not home under the circumstances. Why had she and Chad not seen each other for several days? Detectives invited Nikki in for questioning to gather more information about the case. She was deeply affected by her husband's death and expressed her distress, mentioning that he often smoked inside their home, which she suggested might have caused the fire. Her testimony made investigators suspicious. They believed that her husband's death was not an accident, but a deliberate murder. so they continue to question her. Nikki then explained why she had been absent from home, stating that the stove had broken down and she had to temporarily stay in a hotel because she couldn't stand the cold. However, the strange thing was that the children were not with her or Chad, but living with her mother. During her account of the events, she unexpectedly mentioned that she had to move the children because Chad, her husband, was a cruel alcoholic. She had never mentioned anything negative about him before, only positive things. However, she now stated that both she and the children had been abused by him. She had many photos showing the bruises and injuries her husband had caused. She admitted to the police that she and her children had moved away to escape her abusive husband. Nikki found a job in a new place and was preparing to move in a week. However, her plans changed drastically with the death of her husband. Now that she had no need or reason to run away, she decided to stay. At that time, the investigators had no evidence against Nikki, so they released her, but continued to treat her as a suspect. The next day, the autopsy results came back. Forensic experts discovered that Chad had suffered severe facial injuries from a weapon, and the entire front half of his body had been burned. He was lying on his back when the fire broke out, which resulted in less burn damage to his back, where experts found bullet marks. Obviously, he couldn't have injured himself in the back with that bullet, and if he had intended to end his life, there would have been much simpler ways. The cause of death was determined to be injuries from a weapon, and Chad had died before the fire broke out. There was no soot in his airways, and the forensic expert concluded he had been dead for several days, meaning he could not have ignited the fire. It was clearly not his doing. Someone murdered him and tried to make it look like he took his end life. With these details, Nikki became the prime suspect. Nikki contacted her insurance company to claim compensation for the damage to her property after the fire. Investigators discovered that just days before the fire, on December 26, the family had registered their home with the insurance company. Less than a week later, the house burned down under suspicious circumstances. Furthermore, during the police investigation of the crime scene, they discovered a package in the kitchen addressed to a man named Earl Howard. This new suspect needed to be investigated, and he was found quickly. In her initial interrogation, Nikki claimed she had rented a hotel room. However, it was later revealed that the room was registered to Earl Howard, the man named on the package. He was an ordinary working man who spent most of his free time at home. Originally from Canada, he had moved to Bismarck, North Dakota, USA, for a job opportunity. Soon after, Nikki was taken back to the police station for questioning again. The detectives began asking her leading questions about Earl. Initially, she denied knowing him, but then she unexpectedly admitted to having a relationship with him. She claimed that they had been having an affair for a year, that Chad knew about it and accepted the situation. She then maintained a relationship with Earl. During this time, her alcohol consumption increased, and she faced frequent insults from Chad. Throughout the interrogation, Nikki portrayed herself as a victim. She cried often, but sometimes spoke so softly that the police had to ask her to raise her voice. Experienced detectives suspected she was being insincere and was merely trying to evoke sympathy. After being pressured, her attitude changed, and she stopped crying. She realized that tears could not convince the detectives, so after being advised, she continued to tell the story clearly. Nikki finally provided details about the incident that led to Chad's death on the evening of December 30. That evening, he went to his favorite bowling alley and played for a few hours, then went home. At that time, Nikki was at a hotel with her lover, Earl. She planned to return home later that evening to gather her belongings before their trip to Texas. When she got to their house, she found Chad drunk and he started abusing her again. He physically attacked her, and she stated that during such moments, she would simply leave. However, Nikki then shifted the conversation to more abstract topics. She expressed frustration about Chad's drinking and gambling losses. The investigator had to press her again to continue answering questions. Unexpectedly, she revealed that she had returned home that night not alone, but with her lover, Earl. Chad was clearly upset by this and started yelling at her, prompting her to leave the house. Nikki claimed to have heard a heated argument and a struggle between Earl and Chad, followed by a bang. However, she did not ask Earl what happened. According to Nikki, they simply got into the car and drove away in silence. At this point, Nikki wrote a confession and placed it on the table. Then she decided to tear the paper. However, the detective quickly grabbed the confession from her hands. This action further aroused suspicion, leading the police to conclude that Nikki was involved in the death of her husband, Chad. Furthermore, while investigating the crime scene at Chad's home, detectives found a surveillance camera. They retrieved the video footage, which revealed crucial information. Earl and Nikki arrived at the house around 10 p.m. on December 30, approximately half an hour before Chad left the bowling alley. They went inside and spent about 20 minutes in the house before coming out with several boxes. This was important evidence, as it indicated that Nikki was at the crime scene before Chad's return. Detectives theorized that she was potentially removing her possessions to protect them from a planned fire, which enabled them to charge her with premeditated involvement. It was important to fully restore the evidence, as the circumstantial evidence alone could seem unconvincing to the jury. After this, Chad returned home around 10:30 p.m., seemingly unaware that Nikki and Earl had been at their house. Just before 1 a.m., Nikki and Earl returned to the house. They went inside, and shortly after, nearly all the security cameras stopped recording. Only one camera, which monitored the driveway, continued to operate. This limited footage did not capture everything that occurred afterward. They eventually left the house and drove away. Cigarettes found inside matched those smoked by Earl, but none were fully smoked. They appeared to have been lit and then carelessly discarded on the furniture and floor, creating a fire hazard. This suggested a deliberate setup. Moreover, it was revealed that Nikki was the sole beneficiary of the house insurance policy, valued at $26,000. She was arrested on January 7 for conspiracy to commit murder. Although her bail was set at $500,000, she could not afford it and remained in jail. Additionally, Nikki had 3 previous convictions for fraud and was on house arrest at the time of her arrest. Investigators went to Earl's house to arrest him and take his statement, but he fled. However, he was not able to evade justice for long. 2 days later, he was arrested in Michigan, near the Canadian border. He was trying to escape to his home country to avoid prosecution in the United States. When arrested, he did not resist. After the arrest, police gathered more information from him, which helped clarify the incident of that night. Nikki and Earl had more motives for committing the crime than just collecting an insurance payout on the house. Their relationship lasted for over a year. At one point, she shared with Earl that Chad had a $600,000 life insurance policy. They believed that this money could solve their problems and allow them to live comfortably. She wanted to avoid the complications of divorce and the division of assets, so she chose a darker and more lucrative option. They planned to kill Chad and make it appear that he took his end life. Their goal was to collect all the insurance money they could, both life and property, and then run away to Texas together. On December 9th, they finalized their plan and set it into motion. To prevent her children from witnessing the crime, Nikki sent them to stay with their grandmother. Knowing that Chad was going bowling that night, Nikki went to their home early to gather belongings she wanted to save from a fire. CCTV footage from the hotel captured her and Earl bringing their items to their room. Later, they returned to the scene of the crime, where Nikki disabled the cameras and the security system. Earl was armed, but it is unclear who actually killed Chad, as they blamed each other. Apparently, the murder happened while Chad was sleeping. He was attacked in the back. He died instantly, Then his body was turned upside down and his face was attacked to make it appear that he had injured himself. Earl and Nikki thought that burning the house down would destroy all evidence, making it difficult for forensics to find any clues. They then scattered whiskey bottles around the house to portray Chad as a heavy drinker. Finally, they put a gas heater in the room, lit it, and left, expecting it to cause a fire. The following day, they anxiously awaited news of the incident, but nothing came. Frustrated, they returned to the house and discovered some small, weak fires that had already gone out. To ensure a more effective blaze, they rearranged the mattress and other items to facilitate burning. Earl went down to the basement and started a fire directly above the stove. Meanwhile, Nikki scattered cigarettes around the room, believing their plan would succeed. They left, but for the next 2 days, there was no news about the fire. Fearing their plan had failed, they returned to the scene. On January 2 at 5 p.m., when Nikki opened the door, a backdraft caused the fire to flare up. However, their plan failed, as the house did not burn down as they expected. During the investigation, detectives discovered fingerprints and DNA evidence from both Nikki and Earl. The poor staging of the scene was quickly discovered. Even the placement of the weapon on the bed suggested an attempt to mislead the investigation. If Chad injured himself, the weapon wouldn't be placed that way. This detail became a key argument for the prosecution at trial and was persuasive to the jury. Nikki and Earl were charged with murder. At the last minute, Earl agreed to a plea bargain, which allowed the prosecution to learn all the details of the crime. Earl Howard pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit arson and tampering with evidence. As a result, he received a 25-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole after serving 21 years. During the trial, he and Nikki blamed each other. Earl's plea deal included testifying against Nikki. In contrast, she maintained her innocence, claiming she was outside when the shooting occurred and that Earl was the shooter. She also accused Earl of lighting fires and throwing away cigarettes. During a subsequent interrogation, Nikki told bizarre stories, claiming that Chad was aware of her affair and had allowed her to meet Earl. She also stated that Earl and her husband were friends. Nikki described her husband as an alcoholic, but those close to the family disagreed, stating that Chad did not drink heavily, did not abuse Nikki, and would not permit her to be with Earl. Chad never made anyone doubt his character. No one had ever seen him drunk, and he always prioritized his family, career. Therefore, no one believed that he was a bad husband. They thought Nikki had fabricated the stories right away. On February 17, 2023, Nikki Ensel was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and attempting to cover up the crime. On March 16, 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years, plus an additional 15 years for arson. The sentence was controversial, as Nikki's punishment was harsher than Earl's, despite evidence that he played a key role in the crime. The disparity in sentencing was attributed to Earl admitting guilt and cooperating with the investigation, while Nikki did not. However, the court's decision was final, allowing her to file her first appeal as early as 2026. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Nordal Lalande. On August 26, 2017, in Le Pont de Beauvoisin, Isère, a wedding ceremony was taking place. During the ceremony, no one realized that a stranger had quietly appeared and joined in the joyful atmosphere. He only knew a few people at the ceremony, and he seemed to have his own plans. Among the guests was 8-year-old Maelis Araujo. While everyone was having fun, their mood suddenly changed when Maelis disappeared. This made her family panic. They searched but could not find her. They contacted the police for help. Soon after, the police team arrived and began the search. They searched the entire area and all possible locations she might have gone to. Search dogs and a helicopter from nearby Grenoble were deployed, and additional support was called in. Melis was not the first child to go missing in the area. Between 2007 and 2017, there were numerous disappearances, many of which went unreported or were closed without any leads. No one knows what happened to these children. It is likely that one or more individuals are the perpetrators. The incident left everyone in France very worried. Parents handed out flyers, and local shopkeepers put up posters of Melis in their storefronts. The community was aware of previous disappearances in the area, and so were the local gendarmes. However, at first no one connected Melis's disappearance to the earlier cases. Despite rumors of a serial killer, the police had yet to apprehend a suspect for a decade. This was because these criminals often operated according to a certain pattern. The missing individuals seemed to vanish without a trace, and most search efforts yielded no results. When Melis disappeared, people began to wonder if all these cases could be linked. This raised another pressing question. Why had the authorities been unable to find any clues until now? This has caused public outrage, and they have accused the police of ineffectiveness. 5 days after Melis went missing, the police had no leads. Detectives tried to comfort her family, but they knew the chances of finding her alive were very low, given the time that had passed. Then, a man named Ludovic came forward. He was a guest at the wedding and believed he had important information for the investigation. Ludovic was a close friend of 30-year-old Nordal Lelandais. Ludovic explained that he had crashed the wedding. He didn't have an invitation but attended in place of his cousin, who was invited but could not come. His behavior seemed suspicious to the other guests, but they assumed he was just drunk. He eventually agreed to go back to the table, but then vanished. Nordal was so intelligent that even Melis's mother did not realize something was wrong until it was too late. Ludovic thought Nordal should be investigated. Although they had only briefly met, he had gained the trust of many guests. Throughout the evening, he had come across as friendly and approachable. Melis's mother even had a brief chat with him about her family's 3 dogs. He later offered to show Melis his dogs, which made her mother let her guard down. Her mother later admitted that she never thought her child would get into a car with a complete stranger in the middle of the night without telling her parents. There were a lot of people present, so it was puzzling that Melis could disappear without anyone noticing. The kidnapper clearly took steps to hide their actions. One guest recalled seeing Melis exit through the back door alone. Her parents last saw her around 2:30 a.m. When they realized she was missing, they immediately began searching for her. By that time, Nordal had already left, but soon returned. He approached Melis's mother, expressing surprise at the situation. When she asked if he had seen her daughter, he calmly said he had no idea where she was. He offered to help with the search, but then claimed he felt sick from the wine he had consumed. In another case, Eric Frey, 48, moved to Le Pont de Beauvoisin, Isère, with his girlfriend in 2016. They had a serious relationship and big plans for the future. However, shortly after moving in, Eric suddenly disappeared. He walked to a bakery just 15 minutes from their home but never returned. He left his belongings behind and took only a bank card, which suggested he would return soon. His girlfriend and a neighbor searched the area but couldn't reach him by phone. After several hours of searching, his girlfriend went to the police station to report him missing. Unfortunately, the officers were skeptical and advised her to wait 48 hours before filing an official report, reasoning that he was an adult who could have left on his own. Not wanting to wait long, she initiated her own investigation and requested CCTV footage from the bakery. The video showed Eric buying bread and chatting briefly with the cashier. It was clear he disappeared on his way home. She then contacted the police again, but they still found nothing. A year later, in 2017, she came across a news report about another disappearance, Melis's disappearance. She immediately thought that her boyfriend's case and Melis's case might be connected, potentially involve the same perpetrator. Eric's girlfriend believed that the bakery's surveillance cameras could provide a vital clue to the case. The police examined the footage and compared it to the wedding guest list to find any matches. During the investigation, a witness, Erica, provided information suggesting Nordahl's possible involvement in the case, and this information was reported in the media. She studied his photo carefully for a while. She then reviewed the videos and noticed a striking resemblance that seemed more than just a coincidence. At the same time, France was facing a serious problem. The number of disappearances was increasing. This rise had made the public worried and angry, as it seemed that criminals were becoming bolder. In Chambéry, about 4 months before Melissa's disappearance, the body of 20-year-old Arthur Neuer was found in a river and was determined to have drowned. However, his family disagreed with that conclusion from the inquest. The police discovered that from April 11 to 12, 2017, Arthur had left a local nightclub around 1 a.m. The last person to see him was the nightclub manager, who observed him walking toward the barracks. Since the distance was quite far, Arthur decided to walk along the road, hoping someone would give him a ride. The manager witnessed him flag down a car and get in after asking for a ride. However, he never arrived at his military unit the next morning, leading to his classification as a deserter. Authorities found a trail hundreds of meters from where Arthur got into the car. After reviewing surveillance footage, they uncovered a lead. The car that picked him up had been parked near the nightclub for hours, with the driver apparently waiting for someone. When Arthur appeared on the road, the driver drove off to give him a ride. This raised suspicions, but they could not identify the make or license plate of the car. This was the only lead in the search for Arthur until his body was eventually discovered in the river. His family firmly rejected the idea that he would have deserted the military, as he was passionate about his work and wanted to pursue a military career. Arthur had no prior legal issues. He was generally a friendly person with no history of running away, mental health disorders, or addictions. He also had no conflicts with anyone. Strangely, the police initially took no action. They didn't even examine Arthur's mobile phone until much later, when the search operation began. It was discovered that he had been near a roundabout at 3 a.m., close to a nightclub. Just 4 minutes later, his phone was found 6 kilometers away, and 5 minutes after that, it was located 11 kilometers from the roundabout. Given the time and distance, it was clear that Arthur had been in the kidnapper's car during this period. This information led investigators to identify the mobile phone of the driver. The phone belonged to Nordahl Lelandais, who was driving an Audi A3 at the time. Unfortunately, the nightclub manager, who saw the car stop, couldn't accurately identify its make. The car was searched, but Nordahl denied any involvement in the kidnapping and appeared arrogant. He seemed to feel uncatchable, a trait often found in serial killers. During interrogation, he spoke confidently, demonstrating impressive powers of persuasion. The detectives who worked with him were taken aback. They had difficulty extracting any information from him. Just a few hours after Arthur disappeared, Nordahl visited a car wash, where he spent over 2 hours cleaning the interior and exterior of his car. His behavior raised suspicions. He was supposedly preparing the car for sale, meticulously removing any stains. Surveillance footage from the car wash showed that he focused particularly on the front passenger seat, spending about half an hour on it. Additionally, he took all the napkins and rags he used for cleaning with him, instead of discarding them in the car wash's trash, which also seemed odd. Nordahl insisted that his actions were normal and justified by his preparations for the car sale. Nordahl has 3 large dogs, which cause hair and dirt to accumulate in the interior of his car. He likely realized that the detectives had no solid evidence against him, allowing him to manipulate the situation to his advantage. During questioning, he remained calm, delivering clear and convincing answers, all while accompanied by his lawyer. Despite his suspicions, the police released him due to lack of evidence, and they continued to investigate further. They later discovered that he was actively posting on social media, sharing content that included videos of himself with illegal substances. He openly claimed to be involved in the sale and use of these banned substances on his profiles. As it turns out, Nordahl Leylandes has a criminal record, having been arrested in 2009 for theft and vandalism. However, he was well liked and described by many as a good person. Friends and acquaintances would never have suspected that he could be a serial killer. He was very good at charming people, which probably helped him gain their trust. Sadly, this ability may have contributed to the disappearance of his 13th victim, Lucy Rue. She had been missing for 5 years before Melis disappeared. At 34, she was receiving treatment for phobias at a local psychiatric clinic. She attended therapy during the day and returned home in the evening. One September morning, she left home without any identification or personal belongings and was never seen again. Like other cases, the investigation into Lucy's disappearance found no leads. It seemed she had vanished without a trace. By the end of 2017, Lucy's sister, Natalie, was already aware of Nordahl. She immediately suspected a link between him and Lucy's disappearance after discovering that Lucy had gone missing in roughly the same area where another victim was later found. Unfortunately, just as in previous cases, law enforcement did not take Lucy's case seriously, possibly because of her mental health issues. Years later, investigators finally tracked down a person who was with Lucy at the psychiatric clinic. They discovered that Nordahl was also there for treatment during that time. The two often shared meals in the cafeteria. A witness said he was particularly attentive to her. She was the 13th victim and was described as a beautiful girl who managed to attract his attention. Soon after, she disappeared without a trace. Police began to notice a pattern as they investigated. It became clear that the missing people were related to the neighborhood where Nordahl lived. The attacks occurred within a 25-kilometer radius of his home. Most of the victims were local residents or tourists visiting nearby areas, and many of them knew each other. Nordahl appeared in several cases, including the disappearance of an elderly woman named Georgette, a person who went missing while walking. He even actively participated in the search, volunteering to help find her. However, there was not enough evidence to charge him. Finally, the detectives began to investigate further. One officer spent hours reviewing footage from the car wash and noticed Nordahl's unusual behavior while cleaning his car. He focused on the trunk of the car, spending 47 minutes there, which aroused suspicion. The car was seized again for a detailed examination. To conduct a thorough analysis, all the interior panels were removed, and investigators spent many hours inspecting the vehicle. They eventually discovered blood stains on the wiring in the trunk. DNA testing confirmed the blood was Melis's, raising questions about how it got into the car. The time had come to question Nordahl again and confront him with difficult questions. He was detained once more and brought in for interrogation. From the very beginning, he seemed prepared for the interrogation. He displayed confidence and arrogance, but his demeanor changed when asked about the blood in the trunk. Faced with undeniable evidence, he confessed within a few hours. He admitted that he left the wedding with Melis because he promised to show her his dogs. He claimed the incident was accidental. He said she began to cry for no reason, which frustrated him. In his anger, he struck her hard on the head, resulting in her immediate death. Police then conducted a thorough search and reviewed surveillance camera footage. The investigation focused on recordings from 247 cameras located along the street. They saw video footage of the car carrying Nordahl and Melis. In the footage, she appears frightened, pressing against the locked door, trying to get away from Nordahl. Other recordings show him getting out of the car, seemingly lost in thought, while she is motionless and possibly dead. Nordahl eventually agrees to reveal where he hid Melis's body. However, when they arrived at a remote area near an abandoned factory, he began to act confused and pretended to forget where he had buried her. He led the police in circles for nearly an entire day, and by evening, he still had not disclosed the burial site. Eventually, they found her skull and her clothing. At that moment, he suddenly knelt down and cried loudly. However, his expression seemed insincere. However, the investigation by law enforcement was just beginning. They discovered that Nordahl had left the wedding with Melis at 2:46 a.m. and had put his cell phone on airplane mode to avoid being tracked. He was gone for less than an hour, during which he assaulted her, placed her body in the trunk of his car, and drove to an abandoned factory where he buried her. He then returned to the wedding and, at around 4 a.m., pretended to be drunk to create an alibi without arousing suspicion. Detectives noted a significant issue. He had too little time to accomplish everything he needed to do. This leads them to believe that he actually returned to the wedding with Melis' body still in the trunk. After coming back, he seemed anxious that the police might ask him to open the trunk. The discovery of Melis' body, however, did not provide many answers. By that time, it had completely decomposed, and only skeletal remains were found. The forensic expert could not determine the exact cause of death, and the injuries she sustained were impossible to evaluate. The forensic expert noted that she had a broken nose and jaw, but these injuries were not severe enough to cause death. There were no signs of weapon wounds on the bones, leading them to believe that Nordahl may have acted out of anger when she screamed, causing him to lose control. In Arthur's case, Nordahl admitted to killing Arthur on March 29. He said that an argument had broken out in the car, which led to a fight, and Arthur fell out of the car. According to Nordahl, the fall was the cause of death, and he considered it an accident. However, investigators had a different opinion. Although there may have been an argument between them, Nordahl deliberately chose Arthur as his victim. That night he was like a predator. He may have used sleeping pills to control Arthur, but there is not enough evidence to suggest he intended to kill beforehand. This led to the maximum sentence being 30 years instead of life. At the trial, on the prosecution side, a woman named Monique, who had actually escaped from Nordahl, testified. She did not want to contact the police to report him because she feared for her safety. However, she ultimately decided to tell her story to help the prosecution put him away for a long time. According to her, at about 10 a.m., one day in July 2014, she arrived at a store where she saw a stranger in the parking lot. He was sitting in a dark Audi A3 and greeted her. She replied that she was not interested in making new acquaintances and entered the store to make her purchases. Monique realized that the man was constantly following her. He trailed her throughout the store but didn't purchase anything, raising her suspicions. When she left the store and went to another one, he followed her again. After leaving the second store, he still chased her by car, but the distance between them grew further and further. When she reached the police station, she asked for their help, believing that their intervention would save her from a dangerous situation. Unfortunately, the police showed little concern and felt powerless to act because there was no clear evidence of a crime. At home, Monique told her son the story, but it was only when she read about Nordahl in the newspaper that she realized it was him. Numerous articles described his aggressive personality, including instances of domestic violence, stalking, and harassment. During the trial, Melis's parents sought answers about their daughter's fate, ready to hear any truth, and they expected Nordahl to provide a thorough account of the incident. However, he did not provide the truth, as all of his testimony contradicted what had actually happened. Nordahl claimed he was in a panic and experiencing hallucinations, believing that the spirit of Arthur, one of his previous victims, had taken over his body, compelling him to kill Melis. However, his testimony was dismissed as not credible. The prosecution believes that abuse was the main motive behind Melis's kidnapping, claiming that he abused and then killed her. Unfortunately, her body was badly decomposed, making it impossible for investigators to confirm these suspicions. On May 11, 2021, Nordahl Leylande was convicted of murdering Arthur Neuer and received a 20-year prison sentence. A year later, he was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Melis Araujo, resulting in a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Nordahl chose not to appeal his convictions, and authorities are still investigating his potential involvement in other cases. There are several leads, but direct evidence is scarce, and he has not confessed to any additional crimes. During his time in prison, Nordahl took advantage of every opportunity he had. He discovered that prisoners in French prisons retain most rights, except for release, and he began to exploit these privileges. He corresponded with women, charming them as he usually did, and they came to visit him. Using a secret phone, he communicated with teenagers and accessed adult websites. Overall, he created a comfortable life for himself in prison, complete with a refrigerator, TV, and game console. Despite this, Nordahl confided in other inmates about his plan to escape at the end of the year.